Hi guys, tonight we step into a world that is slowly waking from a very long cold sleep. The air around you feels crisp but not as harsh as it once was. You stand at the edge of a vast landscape where ice still lingers in the distance, glowing faintly under a pale sky. Nearby a small fire crackles, sending thin ribbons of smoke upward, carrying the faint smell of burning wood into the quiet evening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, you can share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always calming to imagine how many different nights are unfolding at once. Now dim the lights and let yourself settle into the gentle rhythm of a world in transition. You begin by noticing the silence. It is not empty, but soft. The kind of quiet that comes after something immense has begun to change. Beneath your feet, the ground is no longer locked in a permanent frost. It still feels cold, slightly firm, but there is a faint give to it, as if the earth itself is loosening its grip. A mainstream historical fact is that around 11,700 years ago, the Earth entered a new geological epoch known as the Holocene, marking the end of the last ice age. This shift was not just a change in temperature, it was the beginning of a completely different kind of world. Glaciers that once covered vast regions of the northern hemisphere began to retreat slowly at first, then more noticeably over generations. You walk forward your steps quiet on the dampening soil, and you notice small patches of green emerging. Low plants push through the ground, fragile but determined. These are the early signs of life-reclaiming land that had been frozen for thousands of years. The air carries a different scent than it once did. Less sharp, less biting. There is moisture here now, a hint of earth and growing things. You breathe it in, and without quite realizing it, you relax just a little. Historians still debate whether people living at this time fully understood how dramatic this change was. For you standing here, it does not feel like a sudden transformation. It feels gradual, almost gentle. But across centuries, the difference becomes undeniable. Off in the distance, you can still see the edge of a glacier. It stands like a silent wall, pale blue and immense. But it is no longer advancing. In fact, if you watch closely, you might notice something subtle. A slow drip. Water trickling down its surface, catching the faint light. That drip is quiet, but it represents something enormous. A quirky tidbit is that some of these melting ice sheets were so massive that they actually affected the Earth's crust, pressing it down under their weight. As they melted, the land slowly began to rise again, a process called isostatic rebound, which in some regions is still happening even today. You continue walking, moving along a gentle slope where meltwater has begun to carve small channels into the ground. These streams are narrow but lively. They move with a soft, constant sound like a whisper threading through the landscape. Water is becoming more common now. Where once there was only ice, there are now pools, streams and soft ground. It changes everything. Plants grow more easily. Animals begin to return. Life spreads quietly without urgency but with persistence. You pause near one of these streams and kneel down, touching the water. It is cold but not painfully so. Your fingers linger for a moment, feeling the gentle current pass around them. Nearby you hear a distant sound, a low call, perhaps an animal. You look up, scanning the horizon, and catch a glimpse of movement. A small group of grazing animals, their forms slightly blurred by distance. They move cautiously, as if still adjusting to a world that no longer behaves the way it used to. Researchers continue to question how quickly different species adapted to these changes. Some animals thrived in the warming climate, expanding into new territories. Others struggled, their bodies and behaviors too closely tied to the colder world that was fading away. You rise slowly and continue your walk, the ground beneath you becoming softer as you move farther from the ice. The landscape begins to open up. Patches of grass, clusters of shrubs, and the occasional small tree begin to appear. Nothing is dense yet, nothing is fully established, but it is enough to change the feeling of the place. There is a sense of possibility here. You might notice how different this feels compared to the world you're used to today. There are no roads, no buildings, no distant hum of machines, only wind, water, and the occasional sound of living creatures moving through the land. And yet this is not an empty world. Somewhere nearby, though you may not see them immediately, other humans exist. Small groups moving through the land following familiar patterns that have sustained them for generations. Hunting, gathering, resting, watching. They too are part of this changing world. Some historians suggest that for these early humans, the warming climate brought both relief and uncertainty. The cold was easing, making survival in some ways less harsh, but at the same time the familiar rhythms of the Ice Age were disappearing. Migration patterns of animals shifted. Landscapes changed. Knowledge passed down through generations had to be adjusted, sometimes quickly. You reach a slightly elevated area and stop looking out across the land. The sky above you is wide and pale with soft clouds drifting slowly. The light is gentle, neither too bright nor too dim. It feels like a moment suspended between what was and what will be. In the distance, the glacier glows, faintly still present but slowly withdrawing. Closer to you, life is beginning to take hold. The contrast is striking but not jarring. It feels like a quiet handover as one world recedes and another emerges. You sit down for a moment, letting the cool ground support you. The air brushes lightly against your skin. You can hear the stream behind you, steady and calm. Somewhere far off, another animal call echoes, then fades. There is no urgency here, no sudden rush toward the future, only a slow unfolding. And as you sit there, you might find yourself wondering something simple. Did anyone at the time realize that this moment marked the beginning of everything that would follow? The farms, the cities, the civilizations, or did it simply feel like another season, another subtle shift in a world that had always been changing? The answer is quiet, just like the landscape around you. Because for those living through it, this was not history. It was simply life. You remain seated for a while, letting the quiet settle deeper around you. The soft murmur of the stream continues behind you, steady and unhurried, while the distant glacier holds its silent presence on the horizon. But as you sit, you begin to notice something subtle in the air, a faint sharpness. Not as strong as before, but still lingering like the last breath of a long winter that has not fully let go. This is not yet a completely warm world. A mainstream historical fact is that just before this warming fully took hold, the Earth experienced a sudden return to colder conditions known as the Younger Dryas. This period lasted for over 1,000 years and brought temperatures back down to near Ice Age levels in many regions, interrupting an earlier warming trend. You stand slowly, brushing your hands against your clothing, and begin to walk again. As you move, you can feel the ground shift beneath your feet. Some areas are soft and damp, while others remain hard still, holding onto the cold. It is as if two different worlds are layered together, one fading, the other emerging. The wind moves gently across the open land, carrying with it a cooler touch. You pull your arms slightly closer to your body, instinctively responding to the chill. It is not unbearable, but it is enough to remind you that warmth has not fully claimed this place. Scholars remain divided on what caused this sudden return to cold conditions. Some suggest that massive amounts of fresh water from melting glaciers disrupted ocean currents, particularly those in the North Atlantic. Others propose that changes in atmospheric circulation played a key role. There are even more unusual ideas, though less widely accepted, that hint at external influences. The exact cause is still uncertain, and the debate continues quietly among researchers. You continue along the edge of the stream, noticing how its flow changes in places. Some sections move freely, while others seem partially frozen, thin layers of ice clinging to shaded edges. You pause and look closely. The ice is delicate, almost fragile, and in some spots it has already begun to crack and melt. A quirky tidbit is that evidence of the Younger Dryas has been found not just in ice cores, but also in layers of ancient pollen buried deep in the soil. These pollen records show a sudden return of cold-loving plants, followed later by their rapid disappearance as the climate warmed again. You kneel again, this time touching a thin edge of ice near the water. It breaks easily under your fingers, dissolving into the current. The sensation is quiet but meaningful. This cold, once dominant, now feels temporary. As you rise, you look out across the land once more. You try to imagine what it would have felt like to live through this shift. One generation adapting to warming conditions only for the cold to return unexpectedly. Then, just as suddenly, the cold begins to fade again. For early humans, this would not have been a simple adjustment. Researchers continue to question how these repeated changes affected human groups at the time. Some likely moved following familiar survival strategies seeking areas where resources remained stable. Others may have struggled, forced to adapt quickly to new and unpredictable conditions. You walk toward a slightly elevated ridge where the ground becomes firmer again. From here you can see more clearly how uneven the landscape is. Patches of thawed earth sit beside areas still gripped by frost. Streams weave unpredictably, their paths shaped by both melting ice and lingering cold. There is no clear boundary between past and present here, only a slow blending. You take a slow breath, feeling the air fill your lungs. It carries both freshness and chill, a combination that feels almost balanced. Not fully comfortable, but not harsh either, a middle state. You might find yourself wondering how people dressed during this time. Animal hides layered carefully would have been essential, not just for warmth, but for flexibility. Clothing had to adapt to changing conditions just like everything else. Today you might check a weather app before stepping outside, but here there is no forecast, only observation, only memory, only instinct. You begin walking again this time, moving away from the stream and toward a more open stretch of land. The ground here is patchy, with small tufts of grass pushing through. In some places the soil is dark and damp. In others it is pale and dry, still recovering from long periods of cold. A soft sound catches your attention. You turn your head and notice a small animal darting between the low plants. Quick, alert, cautious. It pauses briefly, watching you, then disappears again. Life is returning, but it remains careful. The environment is still uncertain, still shifting. Some historians suggest that this period of instability may have delayed certain developments in human societies. With the climate changing so unpredictably, long-term planning would have been difficult. Settling in one place for extended periods might have felt risky. You continue forward, your steps slow and deliberate, matching the calm rhythm of the world around you. The sky above remains pale, with soft light spreading evenly across the land. There are no dramatic shadows, no sudden changes. Everything feels muted, balanced, almost suspended. And yet beneath this calm surface, something important is happening. The cold is losing its hold. You might not notice it in a single moment. There is no dramatic shift, no instant transformation. But over time the signs become clearer. The ice thins, the ground softens, plants spread, animals adjust their paths. The world is changing again. You reach another small rise and stop, turning back to look at the glacier in the distance. It still stands still, imposing, but perhaps just a little smaller than before. Or maybe it is your imagination. Changes like this are difficult to measure in a single lifetime, but they are happening. You sit once more, this time on a patch of dry ground. The surface feels firm beneath you, though not frozen. You rest your hands on your knees and simply observe. The stream continues its quiet flow. The wind brushes gently across the land. The distant ice remains, but no longer feels permanent. And in this moment you begin to sense something subtle but important. The last cold breath of the Ice Age is fading. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, and as it fades, it leaves behind a world that must learn how to exist in a new way. A world where warmth will slowly become the norm, a world where life will expand, adapt, and eventually transform into something far more complex than anything that has existed before. But for now you are here, in between, in a place where the past still lingers and the future has not yet fully arrived. And the quiet continues. You sit quietly for a moment longer, letting the cool air rest against your skin. The world around you feels balanced, as if it cannot quite decide what it wants to become. But slowly, Almost without warning, something begins to shift again. At first, it is not something you see, it is something you feel. The air once edged with a lingering chill begins to soften. It is subtle, so subtle that you might question it at first. But as you take another breath, it feels different. Less sharp, slightly warmer, as if the world has exhaled and chosen not to return to the cold. You stand and begin walking once more, your steps slow and steady. The ground beneath your feet feels less rigid than before. Where earlier you notice patches of frost clinging stubbornly to the soil, now there is more give. The earth feels damp alive in a way that it did not just moments ago. A mainstream historical fact is that the end of the Younger Dryas around 11,700 years ago marked one of the most rapid warming events in Earth's history. In some regions, temperatures may have risen dramatically within just a few decades, a blink of an eye in geological time. You pause, letting that thought settle. A few decades. For you, that would be a lifetime. For those living through it, the world they were born into could feel entirely different by the time they grew older. You continue forward, moving across a gently sloping stretch of land. The plants here seem more numerous than before. Small grasses sway lightly in the breeze, and low shrubs spread out with their leaves catching the soft light. You reach down and brush your fingers across one of the leaves. It feels supple, not brittle, full of moisture. Scholars still debate how abrupt this warming truly felt to the people living at the time. Some researchers suggest that, while the shift was rapid in geological terms, it may still have unfolded gradually enough that individuals experienced it as a series of small changes rather than one overwhelming transformation. Even so, the cumulative effect would have been unmistakable. You walk a little farther and notice the stream again, now wider than it seemed before. The water moves more freely, no longer interrupted by thin layers of ice. The sound has changed too. It is fuller, more continuous, as if the land itself is beginning to breathe more easily. A quirky tidbit is that ice core samples from places like Greenland show temperature increases of several degrees Celsius, happening in a surprisingly short time during this transition. These tiny trapped bubbles of ancient air offer a quiet record of a world changing faster than expected. You kneel beside the stream and dip your hand into the water once more. It is still cold, but the sensation is different now. Less biting, more tolerable. You let your fingers linger, feeling the current move gently around them. When you pull your hand back, droplets cling to your skin before slowly falling back into the stream. You watch them for a moment, noticing how everything seems to move with a kind of calm certainty. You stand again and turn your attention to the horizon. The glacier is still there, but something about it feels altered. Perhaps it is the light. Perhaps it is the way the air moves around it. Or perhaps it is simply your awareness that it is no longer in control of this world. The warmth is taking over. Researchers continue to question what triggered such a rapid end to the cold period. Some point again to ocean circulation patterns suggesting that once disrupted currents resumed their flow, they quickly redistributed heat across the planet. Others look to changes in solar radiation or atmospheric composition. The truth, like many things in this distant past, remains layered and complex. You begin walking uphill, drawn toward a slightly higher vantage point. The climb is gentle, and as you move, you notice more signs of change. The soil becomes darker, richer. Small insects move through the grass, barely visible unless you look closely. A bird call breaks the quiet, soft but distinct, echoing lightly through the open air. These are small things, but together they signal something much larger. Life is responding. You reach the top of the rise and pause, letting your gaze sweep across the land. The view is wider here, more open, and what you see is not a frozen world slowly thawing, but a living landscape beginning to take shape. Patches of green spread outward in uneven patterns. Water glints in small pools and winding streams. The ice, though still present, feels distant now, less dominant. You take a slow breath and notice how comfortable it feels. Not warm in the way you might think of a summer day, but no longer harsh, no longer something you must constantly guard against. You might find yourself wondering how early humans experienced this shift. Did they notice the gradual return of plants, the changing behavior of animals, these slightly easier nights where the cold did not press quite so hard against their shelters? Some historians suggest that these changes may have quietly improved survival conditions. Slightly longer growing seasons, more reliable water sources, a broader range of edible plants. Not dramatic improvements, but enough to matter. You begin your descent from the rise, moving back toward the lower ground. The path is uneven but manageable. As you walk, you pass through areas where the grass grows thicker, brushing lightly against your legs. The texture is soft, almost comforting. You notice a small cluster of footprints in the damp soil, not yours. Older, faint but still visible. They lead toward the water, then disappear. Another presence. Another human, perhaps. Or an animal. Either way, it reminds you that you are not alone in this changing world. Today we might track climate changes with satellites and detailed measurements. We have data models, predictions. But here change is understood through experience, through observation, through the quiet accumulation of small details. You feel it in the air. You see it in the plants. You hear it in the water. And slowly you begin to understand that this is not just another shift. This is the beginning of something entirely new. The cold that once defined this world is fading into memory. The warmth that replaces it is not overwhelming, not sudden in your immediate experience, but steady, persistent. You walk a little farther, then stop once more, letting the stillness settle around you. The wind moves gently. The stream continues its soft song. The distant ice remains, but feels less permanent with each passing moment. And as you stand there, you might notice a quiet realization forming. The world has changed, not in a single instant, but enough that nothing will ever be quite the same again. And the air once sharp and biting now carries something new, a quiet promise of warmth. You continue walking, the gentle warmth still settling into the air around you. It is not dramatic, not overwhelming, but it lingers in a way that feels new. As you move forward, the land begins to change again, this time in a way that is easier to see. The horizon ahead looks uneven, broken by shapes that rise and fall like frozen waves. As you approach, you realize these are not hills in the usual sense, but vast bodies of ice, ancient and slowly collapsing under their own weight. These are the great ice sheets, the giants that once ruled this world. A widely accepted scientific understanding is that during the peak of the last ice age, enormous ice sheets covered large parts of North America and northern Europe, in some places reaching several kilometers thick. Now, as temperatures rise, these massive formations are beginning to retreat, not all at once, but piece by piece. You step closer, careful with your footing as the ground becomes wetter. Meltwater spreads across the surface in thin, shining layers. The earth here feels unstable, shifting slightly beneath your weight, as if unsure of its own structure. From somewhere ahead you hear a deep, distant sound. It is not loud, but it carries. A low cracking followed by a muted rumble. You pause listening. Then it happens again. A section of ice breaks away. You cannot see the exact moment, but you feel it through the ground and hear it echo across the open space. The glacier is not simply melting quietly. It is breaking, collapsing in slow, powerful movements that reshape the land around it. Some researchers note that this period of deglaciation released enormous volumes of water into rivers and oceans, dramatically altering landscapes over relatively short spans of time. Valleys were carved, deeper plains were flooded, and entirely new waterways formed. You move closer to one of the meltwater channels, watching as it rushes past. This is not the gentle stream from before. This water moves with urgency, carrying small fragments of ice and sediment along with it. You crouch down, reaching out, but stopping just short of touching it. The current is stronger here, faster, more forceful. It reminds you that even slow changes can produce powerful effects. A lesser-known detail is that some of these meltwater flows were so large that they created temporary lakes trapped by remaining ice walls. When those natural barriers failed, the resulting floods could be immense, reshaping entire regions in a matter of days. You stand again and take a few careful steps along the edge of the water. The air here feels cooler, touched by the presence of the ice, but it is different from the cold you felt earlier. This is a localized chill, not the deep, endless cold of a frozen world. You glance up at the towering wall of ice nearby. It is immense, pale blue and white, layered with time itself. Each layer holds a record of past winters, past snowfall compressed and preserved. And now all of it is slowly being undone. You might find yourself wondering how long it will take for something this large to disappear. The answer is not simple. Experts continue to discuss how quickly these ice sheets retreated in different regions. In some places, the process was gradual unfolding over thousands of years. In others, it appears to have happened in pulses with periods of rapid collapse followed by slower phases. You begin to walk along a ridge of exposed ground newly revealed as the ice pulls back. The soil here is rough, scattered with stones and debris left behind by the glacier. It is not yet a place for plants to thrive, but given time it will be. For now it feels raw, unfinished. The wind moves across this open space, carrying with it a faint scent of minerals and cold water. It is a clean, almost empty smell, very different from the richer scent of the lower, greener areas you passed earlier. You pause and look back. The contrast is striking. Behind you, life is beginning to take hold. Ahead of you, the ice still dominates, though it is clearly losing ground. You are standing in a place of transition where two worlds overlap. You take a slow breath, letting the moment settle. Then another sound. Closer this time, a sharp crack followed by a softer collapse. You turn your head and catch a glimpse of movement along the ice face. A chunk breaks free and falls, sending up a brief spray of snow and water before disappearing into the flowing melt below. It is not violent, but it is powerful. You watch the ripples spread through the water, then slowly fade. And you realize something. This process, though it feels slow and quiet, is reshaping the entire planet. Some historians suggest that early humans living near these melting ice regions would have had to remain constantly aware of their surroundings. Meltwater floods, unstable ground, and shifting landscapes could present real dangers, even if they were not frequent. You begin to move again, this time stepping more carefully. The ground here is unpredictable, and you can feel it with each step. Small stones shift. Damp patches give slightly under your weight. It requires attention, awareness, a kind of quiet respect for the land. Today you might think of glaciers as distant, almost abstract features seen in documentaries or photographs. But here they are immediate, present, active participants in the shaping of the world. You reach a slightly safer stretch of ground and stop turning once more to take in the scene. The ice stretches out in all directions, broken in places, retreating in others. Water moves everywhere, threading through the landscape, carrying the past into the future. And slowly, steadily, the giants of ice are disappearing. Not all at once, not with a single dramatic moment, but with countless small collapses, quiet flows, and steady warming. You stand there for a while, listening to the distant cracks and the constant rush of water. And in that sound you hear something more than just melting ice. You hear the world changing, one piece at a time. You leave the fractured edge of the ice behind you, stepping carefully onto firmer ground where the land begins to open out. The air feels a little softer here, touched less by the cold breath of the glacier. As you walk, the sound of rushing meltwater fades into something gentler, more distant, like a memory that lingers but no longer dominates. Ahead the land stretches wide and low. At first nothing seems unusual, but as you move forward you begin to notice something subtle. The ground dips slightly in places, forming shallow basins. The soil feels damp under your feet, darker than before, as if it has been soaking in water for a long time. You take a few more steps and stop. In the distance something catches the light. A wide shimmering surface. Water. You walk toward it slowly, the soft ground making your steps quieter. As you get closer, the shape becomes clearer. It is not a small pond or a narrow stream. It is broad, stretching far across the land, reflecting the pale sky above. A large body of water where not long ago there may have been only frozen earth. A well-established finding is that as the great ice sheets melted, sea levels began to rise significantly, eventually increasing by more than 100 meters compared to Ice Age levels. This process did not happen all at once, but it steadily reshaped coastlines across the world. You stand at the edge of this expanding water and look out. The surface is calm with only small ripples moving across it. The air carries a faint scent of wet earth and something else, something slightly unfamiliar. A hint of minerals, perhaps even a distant trace of salt depending on how close this place is to a growing sea. You kneel down and touch the ground near the water's edge. It is soft, almost spongy. In some places your fingers sink slightly into the soil, leaving gentle impressions. This land is changing shape, not dramatically in a single moment, but steadily, quietly over time. Some historians suggest that for people living during this period, these slow changes in water levels would have been noticeable across generations. A place where someone once walked freely might later become marshy, then eventually submerged. You stand again and walk along the edge, following the curve of the shoreline. It feels new, unfinished, as if the land has not yet decided where it ends and the water begins. A lesser-known detail is that many areas we now think of as underwater landscapes, such as parts of the continental shelves, were once dry land during the Ice Age. These regions may have supported human activity before gradually disappearing beneath rising seas. You pause and look out once more, trying to imagine that lost world. Perhaps there were paths here once. Camps. Familiar routes followed season after season. Now all of it is slowly being claimed by water. The thought is not frightening, just quiet. You continue walking, noticing how the vegetation changes near the shoreline. Grasses grow thicker here, their blades bending gently in the breeze. Small plants cluster close to the ground, thriving in the damp conditions. You brush your hand lightly across them as you pass. They feel cool and soft, leaving a faint trace of moisture on your skin. Nearby you hear a soft splash. You turn your head and see a small movement in the water. Perhaps a fish or another aquatic creature beginning to inhabit these newly formed environments. Life is adapting again. Researchers continue to explore how quickly marine and freshwater ecosystems expanded during this time. As new lakes and coastal areas formed, they created opportunities for entirely different kinds of life to flourish. You walk a little farther and notice something interesting. The shoreline here is uneven, marked by subtle ridges and lines. You crouch down to examine them more closely. They look like layers, each one slightly higher or lower than the next. Old edges of the water, places where the boundary once stood before shifting again. You trace one of these lines with your fingers, following its gentle curve. It feels like reading a quiet record of time, written not in words but in shape and texture. Today we might measure sea level changes with precise instruments and long-term data. But here the land itself holds the memory. Each ridge, each layer tells a part of the story. You stand and continue along the water's edge, your pace slow and steady. The air feels more comfortable now, neither too cold nor too warm. It carries a sense of calm that settles into your body as you walk. In the distance you notice birds moving above the water, their shapes gliding smoothly through the sky. They circle briefly, then descend, disappearing near the surface. Another sign, another quiet adjustment to a changing world. You might find yourself wondering how early humans responded to these shifting coastlines. Some groups may have followed the retreating ice and newly exposed land. Others may have stayed near water, drawn by the resources it provided. Fishing gathering along the shore, moving between land and water. New ways of living shaped by new environments. You walk until the ground rises slightly again, giving you a better view of the surrounding area. From here you can see how the water weaves through the landscape, filling low places, connecting with distant streams, gradually expanding its reach. It is not chaotic, it is not sudden, but it is constant. You take a deep breath and let out slowly, watching the surface of the water shimmer under the soft light. The world you're standing in is not fixed. It is moving, shifting, redefining itself with each passing year. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something simple yet profound. The boundaries of the earth are not permanent. Land can become water. Water can reshape land. And the places that feel stable today may, given enough time, become something entirely different. You turn away from the shoreline and begin walking again, carrying that quiet awareness with you. Behind you, the water continues its slow expansion. Ahead of you, the land waits, still changing, still adapting. And somewhere in between, life finds a way to continue. You move away from the water, leaving the soft shoreline behind, and begin walking toward higher ground. The earth beneath your feet gradually becomes firmer again, though it still carries a gentle dampness, a quiet reminder of how much water now moves through this world. As you climb, the landscape begins to change in another subtle way. At first, it is easy to miss, just a few scattered shapes rising slightly above the grasses. Then as you come closer, you see them more clearly. Small trees, not tall, not dense, but present. They stand with thin trunks and delicate branches, their leaves moving lightly in the breeze. Some are clustered together, while others stand alone, as if testing whether this place can support them. You slow your steps, drawn toward one of these early trees. Its bark feels smooth beneath your fingers, still young, not yet roughened by age. The leaves are soft, slightly cool to the touch, carrying a faint scent that lingers on your skin. This is something new. A commonly accepted understanding is that as the climate warmed after the last ice age, forests began to spread into areas that had long been dominated by ice or tundra. Over time, these early plants would grow into vast woodlands, reshaping entire regions. You step back and look around. Where once there may have been only open frozen ground, there are now patches of green that rise higher than the grasses. It is not yet a forest, not even close, but it is the beginning. The air feels different here. There is a softness to it, a slight richness, as if the presence of growing plants has changed the way it carries scent and moisture. You breathe in slowly, noticing how the smell of earth is deeper, layered with something living. Some historians suggest that this gradual return of trees would have been one of the most visible signs of long-term change for people living at the time. Unlike temperature, which can shift subtly, the spread of trees transforms the entire landscape in ways that are hard to ignore. You continue walking, moving between these scattered clusters. The ground beneath them feels slightly cooler, shaded by their leaves. Small patches of moss begin to appear, soft and faintly damp, clinging to the soil. A lesser-known detail is that scientists study ancient pollen preserved in lake sediments to understand how these early forests expanded. By examining these microscopic traces, they can reconstruct which types of plants grew in different regions over time. You pause and look down at the ground, imagining those tiny grains of pollen drifting through the air thousands of years ago, settling quietly, waiting to be discovered far in the future. It is a quiet kind of record-keeping. You walk a little farther and notice how the land begins to feel more enclosed. Even though the trees are still small and spaced apart, they create a sense of structure. The open horizon you saw earlier is now partially hidden, broken by branches and leaves. The light changes too. It filters through the leaves in soft patterns, creating shifting patches of brightness and shadow on the ground. The effect is gentle, almost soothing, as if the world is learning how to create shade again. You might find yourself wondering how this would have changed daily life for early humans. In open tundra, visibility stretches far in every direction. Movement is easy to track. But here, with even a small number of trees, the environment becomes more complex. Paths are less obvious. Sounds travel differently. Hiding places increase. Researchers continue to explore how the spread of forests influenced human behavior. Some groups may have adapted by developing new hunting strategies, learning to move quietly through more enclosed spaces. Others may have favored open areas where visibility remained clear. You brush past a low branch, feeling it lightly graze your arm. The leaves rustle softly, adding a new layer of sound to the environment. It is no longer just wind and water. Now there is movement within the plants themselves. A gentle living sound. You step into a slightly denser patch of growth and pause. The air here feels cooler, shaded with a faint stillness. The ground is softer, cushioned by a thin layer of plant matter. You crouch down and press your hand into the soil. It yields slightly springy and moist. This is not the hard frozen ground of earlier sections. It is beginning to hold life in a different way, supporting roots, insects, and microorganisms. Today you might think of forests as permanent features, something that has always been there. But in this moment you are witnessing their return, their slow and careful spread across a landscape that has long been without them. You stand again and continue walking your pace unhurried. In the distance you hear another sound, a soft rustling followed by a brief pause. You turn your head and catch a glimpse of movement between the trees. A small animal, partially hidden, watching you with cautious curiosity, before slipping quietly out of sight. The presence of trees changes everything. It provides shelter, food, and protection. It also introduces uncertainty. What lies just beyond your view is no longer always visible. Some historians suggest that this growing complexity in the environment may have encouraged new forms of awareness and adaptability among human groups. The ability to read subtle signs, to listen carefully, to move with intention, would have become even more important. You reach a small clearing and stop letting the light fall fully around you again. From here you can see both the scattered trees and the open land beyond. Two worlds still blending together. You take a slow breath, feeling the calm settle into your body. The air carries the scent of leaves and soil. The ground feels alive beneath your feet. The sounds around you are gentle, layered, and steady. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something quiet but important. The return of forests is not just a change in scenery. It is a shift in how life exists, how it moves, how it grows, and how it connects. You look out once more, watching the small trees sway lightly in the breeze. They are not yet towering, not yet dense, but they are here, and given time they will shape this world in ways that are only just beginning. You step out from the light shade of the young trees and return to a more open stretch of land. The air feels slightly warmer here, and the breeze moves freely across the grasses, carrying with it a mix of scents from soil, water, and growing plants. As you walk, you begin to notice movement. At first it is distant, shapes shifting along the horizon. Then as your eyes adjust, you see them more clearly. A group of animals moving together across the land. They travel in a loose formation, heads low, occasionally pausing to graze. Their movement is calm but purposeful, as if guided by something deeper than simple wandering. You slow your pace, watching carefully. These animals are not random visitors. They are part of a larger pattern. It is well understood that as the climate warmed at the end of the Ice Age, many animal species began to shift their ranges, moving into newly available habitats, while others retreated or disappeared entirely. Migration became a crucial way of adapting to changing conditions. You take a few quiet steps closer, careful not to disturb them. The ground beneath your feet is soft but stable, allowing you to move without much sound. The wind is in your favour, carrying your scent away. The animals continue grazing, occasionally lifting their heads to scan their surroundings. Their bodies look strong, but there is a certain alertness in their movements. This is not a settled world. It is still changing, and they seem to know it. Some researchers suggest that these shifting migration patterns may have created both opportunities and challenges for early humans. Following herds could provide a reliable source of food, but only if people could anticipate where those herds would go. You watch as one of the animals steps forward, then another, and soon the entire group begins to move again. Their direction seems steady, as if they are following a path known to them even if it is invisible to you. You might find yourself wondering how such knowledge is passed down. How do they know where to go? The answer is quiet, carried in instinct, memory, and the subtle reading of the land. A curious detail is that some Ice Age animals like mammoths and giant deer gradually disappeared during this period, while others adapted and continued. The exact reasons are still being examined, with climate change and human activity both considered possible factors. You continue walking, keeping a respectful distance as the animals move across the landscape. The grasses sway around them, brushing against their legs, creating a soft rhythmic sound. Nearby you notice smaller creatures as well, a quick movement through the grass, a bird lifting briefly into the air before settling again. Life is becoming more varied, more layered. You pause and listen. The soundscape has changed. Where earlier there was mostly wind and water, now there are subtle additions, footsteps, rustling, occasional calls that rise and fall gently across the land. It is still quiet, but it is no longer empty. You take a slow breath, letting the moment settle. The presence of animals brings a different kind of awareness. You find yourself moving more carefully, paying closer attention to where you step, to the direction of the wind, to the sounds around you. This is a shared space. You are not alone here. Some historians propose that as environments became richer and more diverse, human groups had to become more flexible in their strategies. Hunting required patience and observation. Gathering depended on knowing where and when resources would appear. You continue walking, moving slightly uphill once more. From this higher ground, you can see more clearly how the animals spread out across the landscape, forming loose clusters that shift and reform as they move. It is not chaotic. There is a pattern to it, even if you cannot fully understand it. You sit down on a patch of dry grass, keeping your distance, and simply watch. The animals graze. They move. They pause. Time feels slower here. Or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Today, movement often feels rushed, guided by schedules and urgency. But here, everything follows a different rhythm, one that is tied to the land, to the seasons, to the quiet needs of survival. You might notice how the animals respond to the environment. When the wind shifts, they adjust their direction. When they reach a patch of richer grass, they linger. When a distant sound reaches them, they pause alert before continuing. These are small decisions, but they matter. Researchers continue to explore how closely early humans may have followed these patterns, learning from the behavior of animals to better understand the changing world around them. You stand again, stretching slightly, and begin to move along the edge of the grazing area. The animals remain aware of you but do not panic. You're simply another presence in the distance. The sky above remains soft and open with light clouds drifting slowly. The temperature feels steady, comfortable in a way that would have been rare during the colder periods. You walk until the animals begin to fade into the distance, their shapes blending into the landscape once more. But their presence lingers. A reminder that life is not just returning, it is adapting. You pause one last time and look out across the land. Grasses moving in the wind, animals travelling in quiet groups, small creatures hidden among the plants. Everything connected in ways that are not immediately obvious but deeply real. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something gentle but important. This changing climate is not just reshaping the land, it is guiding the movement of life itself. Where it goes, how it survives, how it continues, and in that quiet movement the future is already beginning to take form. You continue walking after the animals fade into the distance, their movement leaving behind a quiet imprint on your thoughts. The land feels fuller now, not crowded, but alive, in a way that is becoming more familiar with each step. As the grasses brush softly against your legs, you begin to notice something else. Subtle signs that you're not the only human presence here. At first, it is just a faint disturbance in the soil, a slight depression where the ground has been pressed down before, then another, and another. Footprints. Not fresh, but not entirely gone either. You slow your pace, your attention sharpening gently. The prints move in a loose line, not perfectly straight, but purposeful. Whoever made them was walking with intent, moving through the landscape with quiet awareness. You follow them for a short distance, careful not to disturb what remains. Soon the land begins to shift again, rising slightly into a low ridge. Beyond it you notice a cluster of shapes. Not natural, not quite. You step closer, your movement steady and calm. And then you see it clearly. A small camp. A few simple structures made from wood, animal hides and branches. Low to the ground, shaped by necessity rather than design. Smoke rises faintly from a central fire, thin and pale against the open sky. You pause at a respectful distance. This is a place where people have chosen to stay at least for a while. A well-supported idea is that during this period of climate transition, many human groups lived as hunter-gatherers, moving seasonally but sometimes returning to familiar locations that offered reliable resources such as water animals and plant life. You take a few quiet steps closer, observing the details. The fire crackles softly, its warmth barely reaching you from where you stand. Around it, tools are scattered with a kind of careful disorder. Stone flakes shaped and sharpened, pieces of bone, simple containers made from natural materials. There is no rush here. Everything has a place, even if it does not look organized in the way you might expect today. You notice the ground near the fire is worn smooth, suggesting repeated use. This is not a place that was used once and abandoned. It has been lived in, returned, perhaps even depended on. Some historians suggest that as the climate became more stable, certain locations began to support longer stays. Not permanent settlements in the way we think of them now, but places where people lingered, where routines began to form. You walk slowly along the edge of the camp, careful not to intrude. The smell of smoke reaches you more clearly now, mixed with a faint scent of cooked food and damp earth. It is a comforting smell, one that suggests warmth, safety, and human presence. A small detail that often goes unnoticed is how important fire would have been during this time, not just for warmth, but for cooking, protection, and even social connection. The fire becomes a centre, a place where people gather, share, and rest. You crouch slightly and look at one of the tools left near the fire. A stone blade. It is simple but carefully shaped. The edges are sharp, the form balanced. Someone spent time making this, shaping it with patience and skill. You might find yourself wondering who they were, what their day looked like, how they understood the world around them. Researchers continue to explore how early humans adapted their behaviour during this warming period. With changing environments came new challenges, but also new opportunities. Different plants to gather, different animals to hunt, different paths to follow. You stand again and look around. The camp is quiet at the moment. No voices, no movement. Perhaps the people who live here are nearby gathering food or tracking animals, moving through the landscape with the same awareness you have begun to feel. You take a few steps back, giving the spaces distance. This is not your place, but it is part of your journey. As you turn slightly, you notice something else. Beyond the camp, the land opens toward a small stream, its water moving gently through a narrow channel. The location is not random. Water nearby, open land for visibility, access to plants and animals. It is a careful choice. Today we might think of choosing a home based on comfort or convenience. But here, every decision is tied to survival. Every location must offer something essential. You begin to walk again, moving away from the camp but carrying its presence with you. The idea of people living within this changing world adds a new layer to everything you have seen. The melting ice, the shifting waters, the returning forests, the moving animals, all of it is not just background. It is part of their daily life. Some historians propose that living through such a period of change required a deep connection to the environment, an ability to notice small details, to adapt quickly, to learn constantly. You walk slowly, letting your steps match the quiet rhythm of the land. The air feels steady now, neither cold nor warm in any extreme. The sounds around you are soft and layered. Wind through grass, water in the distance, occasional movement from unseen creatures, and somewhere behind you the faint trace of smoke still rises into the sky. You pause one last time and look back. The camp is barely visible now, blending into the landscape. But it is there, a reminder that humans are already part of this transformation, not separate from it, not observing from a distance, but living within it, adapting to it, shaped by it. And as you turn forward again, continuing your walk into this changing world, you begin to understand something quiet and grounding. This moment in history is not just about the planet shifting. It is about people finding their place within that shift, learning slowly how to live in a world that is becoming something new. You leave the quiet camp behind, its faint traces slowly dissolving into the distance as you continue forward. The air feels steady, carrying a calm that seems to settle deeper with each step you take. The land ahead stretches gently, neither too open nor too enclosed, offering a balance that feels easier to move through. As you walk, your attention begins to shift towards something more subtle. Not just the land, not just the animals, but the way people are beginning to shape their tools in response to all of this change. You notice it first in the ground beneath your feet, a small scatter of stone fragments almost easy to miss unless you look closely. They are not random. Their edges are sharp, their shapes deliberate. These are the remains of tool-making, the quiet evidence of hands working carefully with stone. You crouch down and pick one up. It is light with a clean edge that catches the light as you turn it. Not crude, not accidental. It has been shaped with intention, chipped away piece by piece until it became something useful. An established archaeological observation is that during this transitional period, stone tool technologies began to diversify, with smaller and more refined tools appearing in many regions. These tools were often easier to carry and better suited to a wider range of tasks. You run your thumb gently along the edge, careful not to press too hard. It feels precise, controlled. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. You place it back where you found it and stand again looking around. The land here feels different from earlier places you've walked. There's a sense that it has been used, passed through, worked upon. Not heavily changed, but touched. You take a few steps and find another piece. Then another! A pattern begins to form. Some researchers suggest that as environments became more varied, human tools needed to adapt as well. Hunting in open tundra requires different strategies than moving through forests or near water. Tools became more specialized, designed for specific tasks rather than general use. You continue walking, your eyes now more attentive to the ground. You notice a longer piece of stone shaped into a narrow blade. Nearby a rounded stone that may have been used for grinding or shaping other materials. These are small objects, but they carry a quiet significance. They represent thought, planning, adaptation. A curious detail is that many of these smaller stone tools, often called microliths, could be attached to wooden handles or shafts, creating more complex tools like spears or cutting implements. This allowed for greater efficiency and flexibility. You imagine someone sitting where you now stand, carefully shaping these pieces, the repetitive motion, the soft tapping of stone against stone, the focus required to create something both sharp and durable. It is not rushed work, it is patient. You walk a little farther and notice a flat patch of ground where the soil is slightly darker. You crouch again, brushing away a thin layer of dust with your hand. Beneath it you find more fragments clustered together. A place where tools were made. The ground here holds a quiet memory of activity, of hands working, of time spent shaping materials to meet the needs of a changing world. You sit back on your heels and look around. The environment offers many resources now. Wood from growing trees, stone from exposed ground, water from nearby streams, plants that can be gathered, animals that can be tracked. But using these resources effectively requires knowledge. Some historians propose that during this time knowledge sharing within groups became increasingly important. Skills like toolmaking would have been taught, practiced, refined, and passed down, forming an essential part of survival. You stand again and continue walking, carrying that thought with you. Today, tools are often complex, created through machines and advanced processes. But here each tool carries the direct imprint of the person who made it, their decisions, their skill, their understanding of the material. You pass through another area where the land rises slightly, offering a clearer view of the surroundings. From here you can see how different parts of the landscape connect. Open grasslands, patches of young trees, distant water. It is a varied environment, and the tools you have seen reflect that variety. You might find yourself wondering how people decided what to make, what kind of tool was needed, what shape it should take. The answers are not written anywhere. They are learned through experience, through trial and error, through careful observation of what works and what does not. Researchers continue to examine how these evolving technologies spread between groups. It is possible that ideas travelled as people met, shared resources, or moved through overlapping territories. You walk slowly or step, steady your mind, calm. The presence of these tools changes how you see the land. It is no longer just a natural space. It is a lived space, a place where humans are actively responding to change, adapting their behaviour, refining their skills, finding ways to live more effectively within a world that is becoming more complex. You stop once more and look down at your hands, empty, but aware. You imagine holding one of those tools again, feeling its weight, its balance, knowing that it was shaped for a purpose, for a need that was immediate and real. The wind moves gently across the land, carrying with it the faint sounds of life continuing all around you. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something quietly important. The changing climate is not only reshaping the land, it is shaping human thought, encouraging new ideas, new solutions, new ways of interacting with the world. And in these small, carefully crafted tools, you can see the beginning of something that will continue to grow. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. Just like everything else in this unfolding story. You continue walking, leaving behind the scattered traces of stone tools. The ground ahead feels gently worn, as if it has been passed over many times, though not in a way that leaves obvious paths, just a quiet sense that others have moved through here before you. The air is calm, carrying a steady warmth that now feels more familiar than surprising. As you move forward, you begin to notice something subtle in the landscape, a place where movement seems to slow, not because the land demands it, but because it invites it. You step into a shallow valley where the wind is softer and the ground feels slightly more sheltered. The grasses here grow thicker, and small clusters of plants form natural pockets of cover. Nearby a stream moves gently, its sound low and consistent. It feels like a place where someone might stay, not just pass through. You slow your pace even more, letting your steps match the quiet stillness around you. As you walk, you notice small details that suggest repeated presence. A patch of flattened grass, a circle of stones loosely arranged, faint markings in the soil where something once rested. These are not permanent structures, but they are not accidental either. Archaeological evidence indicates that during this warming period, some human groups began to return to the same locations more frequently, especially areas that offered reliable access to water, food, and shelter. These places became familiar, almost like seasonal homes. You move closer to the circle of stones and crouch down. The arrangement is simple but deliberate. The stones are placed just far enough apart to suggest purpose. Perhaps they once held something in place, a covering, a frame, a windbreak. You run your fingers lightly across one of the stones. It is smooth on one side, rough on the other, shaped more by time than by tools. You sit back and look around. The valley holds a quiet sense of comfort. The wind does not press as strongly here. The ground is soft but not unstable. The nearby water offers a steady source of life. It is easy to imagine people choosing this place again and again. Some researchers suggest that as climate stabilized, certain landscapes became predictable enough to support repeated use. Instead of constant movement across vast distances, groups could begin to follow seasonal patterns, returning to familiar locations at certain times of the year. You stand again and walk slowly along the edge of the valley. The plants here are varied. Some low and dense, others taller and more spread out. You notice small clusters of seeds forming on certain stems, subtle signs of reproduction and growth. You reach out and gently touch one of them. It feels dry on the outside, but full holding something inside. A quiet possibility. A small but interesting detail is that during this time, humans may have started to pay closer attention to the growth cycles of plants, noticing when they appeared, when they matured, and when they could be gathered. You continue walking your thoughts, moving slowly like the stream beside you. The idea of staying in one place even for a short time changes how you interact with the world. You begin to notice patterns, where the sun falls at different times of day, how the wind moves through the valley, which areas stay dry after rain, which plants grow best in certain spots. These are not dramatic observations, but they matter. Some historians propose that this growing awareness of place laid the groundwork for later developments, including the eventual shift toward more permanent settlements, not yet cities, not yet villages, but the beginnings of something more rooted. You walk toward the stream and sit down beside it, letting the sound settle into your awareness. The water moves steadily, reflecting the soft light above. You dip your fingers into it, feeling its coolness, its consistency. Reliable? That word feels important here. A place like this offers reliability in a world that has only recently begun to stabilize. You might find yourself wondering how it would feel to return to the same place again and again, to recognize it, to remember where things are, to build a quiet familiarity with the land. Today we often think of home as something fixed, something permanent. But here home may be something more fluid, a place that welcomes you back but does not hold you forever. You stand again and take a few steps back, looking at the valley as a whole. It is not remarkable in a dramatic sense. No towering features, no overwhelming scale, but it holds something else, a quiet suitability. You can imagine fires being lit here as the light fades, people gathering, resting, sharing food, voices low, movements unhurried, the kind of place where time feels softer. Researchers continue to explore how these repeated occupations of certain sites influence social behavior. Returning to the same place might strengthen group identity, create shared memories, and shape routines. You take a slow breath and let out gently. The air feels steady. The land feels welcoming. And for the first time in your journey, there is a sense that movement is not the only option. Staying even briefly becomes part of the rhythm. You turn and begin to walk out of the valley, your steps calm and measured. Behind you, the space remains unchanged, quiet, stable, waiting. And as you move forward, you carry with you a simple realization. The world is not just becoming warmer, it is becoming more predictable. And in that predictability, new ways of living are beginning to take shape. Slowly, gently, almost without notice. You leave the quiet valley behind, its sense of calm lingering gently as you return to the open land. The air feels steady, neither shifting nor uncertain, and as you walk, the rhythm of your steps blends easily with the soft sounds around you. Ahead, you begin to hear water again, not the distant rush from melting ice, not the stillness of a quiet pool, but something more constant, a broader, fuller sound that carries across the landscape in a slow, steady flow. You follow it. As the ground slopes downward, the sound grows clearer until the land opens to reveal a wide river moving calmly through the terrain. Its surface reflects the sky in muted tones, broken only by gentle ripples that drift along its length. You stand at the edge looking out. The river feels different from the smaller streams you've passed before. It carries weight, presence, a sense that it has been here long enough to shape the land around it. Geological studies show that as glaciers melted, many of today's major rivers grew stronger and more defined, fed by increased runoff and seasonal flows. These waterways became essential features of the landscape, guiding both ecosystems and human activity. You walk along the riverbank, your steps slow as you take in the details. The soil here is rich and dark, holding moisture in a way that supports thicker plant growth. Grasses are taller, and clusters of plants gather more densely near the water's edge. You reach down and touch the ground. It feels firm yet alive, capable of holding roots of sustaining growth over time. You might notice how different this feels from the rough, newly exposed land near the ice. Here the environment feels established, settled in a quiet way. Some researchers suggest that rivers like this would have drawn both animals and humans, offering a dependable source of water, food, and movement through the landscape. They become natural pathways connecting different regions without the need for roads. You walk beside the river, watching as it bends gently, following its own path without urgency. A small detail that often goes unnoticed is how rivers carry more than water. They move nutrients, sediments, and seeds across long distances, helping shape ecosystems far beyond their immediate banks. You pause and watch the surface. Something moves beneath. A brief flicker, then stillness again. Fish, perhaps, or something smaller. Life within the water, just as life now fills the land. You kneel at the edge and dip your hand into the river. The current is steady, stronger than the streams you've touched before. It moves with quiet confidence, not rushing, but never stopping. You let your fingers remain for a moment, feeling the flow. Consistent, reliable, these qualities begin to feel important. You stand again and continue walking. The river curves gently ahead, and as you follow it, you begin to notice something else. Tracks, not just a few scattered impressions, but many. Animals have passed here often, their footprints layered over time. Different sizes, different shapes, crossing and recrossing the soft ground near the water. This is a shared place, a meeting point. Some historians propose that rivers may have served as gathering spaces where both animals and humans returned regularly. The predictability of water made it a central part of survival, especially as the climate became more stable. You move a little farther and notice a flat area near the bank where the ground is more worn. You crouch down and run your hand across it. Smooth. Used. Not recently perhaps, but often enough to leave a mark. You look around imagining how this place might have been used. People coming to collect water, to clean tools, to prepare food, to rest. The river offers not just resources but a rhythm. It flows day and night unchanged by small shifts in weather or season. Today we often rely on complex systems to bring water to us. Pipes, pumps, storage. But here the river is immediate, direct, a presence you can see, hear and touch. You stand and take a slow breath. The air near the water feels slightly cooler, touched by the movement of the river. It carries a faint scent of wet earth, and plant life steady and calming. You walk on, following the curve as it leads you through the landscape. Birds move along the river's edge, their calls soft and brief. Insects hover above the surface, catching the light in small flashes. The environment feels layered, each element connected through the presence of water. Researchers continue to examine how early human groups may have organized their movements around rivers. These waterways not only provided resources but also acted as natural guides, helping people navigate and understand their surroundings. You stop once more and look out across the river. It stretches into the distance, disappearing gently as it bends beyond your view. There is no urgency in its movement, no sudden change, only a steady flow. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something quietly important. In a world that has only recently begun to stabilize, rivers offer a kind of certainty. They anchor the landscape. They connect different parts of the land. They support life in ways that are both simple and profound. You take a final look, then turn and begin to walk again, leaving the river behind, but carrying its presence with you. The sound of flowing water fades slowly, replaced once more by the soft movement of wind through grass. And as you continue your journey, you carry a gentle awareness that in this changing world, some things are becoming steady, and those steady things are beginning to shape everything else. You continue walking, the sound of the river fading into the background until it becomes just another quiet layer beneath the wind. The land ahead feels open again, but not empty. There is a gentle sense of order now, something subtle that you begin to notice as you move. At first it is easy to overlook, just a shift in the light, a slight difference in the air, but as you walk farther you begin to feel a pattern forming. The warmth of the day lingers, but it no longer feels unpredictable. The air holds a steady softness, as if it has settled into a rhythm that repeats over time. You pause and look up. The sky is clear, pale and calm. The light spreads evenly across the land, not harsh, not dim. It feels balanced, like something that returns again and again in the same way. You take a slow breath and let it out. There is a quiet familiarity here. A general scientific understanding is that with the beginning of the Holocene, seasonal patterns became more stable and predictable in many regions. This allowed plants, animals, and human groups to adapt to repeating cycles of warmth and cold growth and rest. You begin walking again, paying closer attention to the details around you. The plants you pass show subtle differences. Some are full and green, thriving in the present warmth. Others appear drier, as if they have already passed through a period of growth and are now preparing for change. It is not random. There is a sequence to it. You reach down and gently touch a cluster of grass. The tips feel dry while the base remains soft and alive, a quiet balance between growth and aging. You might find yourself wondering how long these patterns have been forming, how many cycles it takes before something becomes predictable. Some researchers suggest that once climate stabilized, seasonal changes became reliable enough for both plants and animals to develop clear cycles. Migration, breeding, and growth all began to follow these repeating patterns. You walk a little farther and notice something else. A tree you pass shows early signs of change in its leaves. Some are bright and full, while others have begun to fade slightly at the edges. Not a dramatic shift, just a gentle transition. A small detail worth noticing is that trees respond closely to seasonal cues such as temperature and daylight. Even slight changes in these factors can influence when they grow, shed leaves, or enter periods of rest. You continue walking, your pace slow and steady. The idea of repetition begins to settle into your thoughts. Morning and evening, warmth and coolness, growth and stillness. These cycles create a kind of rhythm that shapes everything around you. Today you might think of seasons as something obvious, something marked clearly on a calendar. But here the awareness comes from observation, from noticing small changes in the land, in the air, in the behavior of living things. You step over a small patch of ground where the soil is slightly cracked, drier than the surrounding area. It suggests a period without rain, even if only briefly. Then a few steps later you pass through a damp patch where water has gathered. Variation within a pattern. You pause and look out across the land. The grasses move gently in the breeze, their motion steady and unhurried. In the distance you see animals, again smaller this time, scattered across the field, grazing in no particular rush. Everything feels timed, not precisely but naturally. Some historians propose that the emergence of predictable seasons may have had a profound impact on human life. Knowing when plants would grow, when animals would migrate, when certain resources would be available, could shape decisions about movement, gathering, and survival. You continue walking your thoughts, drifting softly with each step. The air begins to cool slightly as the light shifts. It is not a sudden change, just a gentle easing of warmth, a reminder that the day itself follows a pattern as well. You wrap your arms loosely around yourself, not out of necessity, but out of quiet awareness of the change. A bird call echoes briefly, then fades. The wind slows, then returns. Small fluctuations within a steady rhythm. Researchers continue to explore how early humans may have learned to read these patterns, using them to guide their actions. The ability to anticipate change, even in a general sense, could make a difference in survival. You walk until you reach a slightly elevated patch of ground and stop. From here you can see a wide stretch of land shaped by everything you have experienced so far. Water moving through the distance. Trees scattered across the terrain. Animals grazing. Plants growing in quiet cycles. It all fits together, not perfectly, but consistently. You take a deep breath and let it out slowly. The air feels calm, the world feels steady, and as you stand there you begin to understand something simple but meaningful. This is the beginning of a world you would recognize. A world where time is not just passing, but repeating. Where change does not erase everything, but follows patterns that can be learned. You might find comfort in that idea. The predictability, the quiet return of familiar conditions. You turn and begin walking again, letting your steps fall into the rhythm you now sense all around you. The light continues to soften. The air continues to cool. And the world moves gently from one state to another, not abruptly, but with quiet consistency. And in that steady movement, life finds its place. Again and again, you walk on, letting the steady rhythm of the land guide your pace. The sense of repeating patterns lingers with you, quietly shaping the way you notice things now. Each step feels a little more familiar, not because the place is the same, but because you're beginning to understand it. Ahead, the ground changes again, becoming slightly more uneven. Low clusters of plants gather in patches, some thicker than others, as if certain areas offer better conditions for growth. You slow down and look more closely. These plants are different from the grasses you've been passing. Shorter, denser. Their leaves are broader, and some carry small shapes that seem to form along thin stems. You kneel beside one of them. Tiny seeds. Not many. Not perfectly uniform, but present. A commonly accepted view is that toward the end of the Ice Age and into the early Holocene, human groups began to rely more heavily on gathering plant foods, paying closer attention to which plants were edible when they ripened and where they grew best. You reach out and gently touch one of the seed clusters. It feels dry, delicate, and slightly rough against your fingertips. You roll it lightly between your fingers, noticing how easily it separates. Something about this feels important, not urgent, but meaningful. You sit back slightly and look around. There are more of these plants nearby, scattered, but not random. They seem to prefer certain patches of soil growing where conditions allow them to thrive. You might find yourself wondering how someone first noticed this, how they learned that these small seeds could be gathered, stored, perhaps even encouraged to grow again. Some researchers suggest that the transition toward more consistent plant use did not happen all at once. It likely developed gradually through repeated observation, small experiments, and shared knowledge within groups. You pick up a small cluster that has already fallen to the ground. It breaks apart easily in your hand, leaving tiny fragments behind. You brush them off gently, watching as they fall back into the soil. A subtle detail worth noting is that some early plant gathering may have unintentionally encouraged future growth. Dropped seeds, disturbed soil, and repeated visits to the same areas could create conditions that helped certain plants spread more successfully. You stand again and walk slowly through the patch, careful not to disturb too much. The plants brush lightly against your legs, their texture soft but noticeable. The air here carries a faint scent, slightly dry, mixed with the richer smell of earth beneath. It is a quiet place, not dramatic, but full of small possibilities. You continue walking, your thoughts moving gently. The idea of gathering changes how you see the land. You are no longer just passing through. You are noticing, selecting, remembering. Some historians propose that this growing awareness of plant life may have been one of the earlier steps toward agriculture, though at this stage it is still far from deliberate farming. It is more about understanding patterns than controlling them. You reach another cluster and pause again. This time you notice differences between the plants. Some are fuller, some have more seeds, others appear weaker, smaller. Variation within the same species. You might wonder if early humans began to notice these differences. Did they prefer certain plants over others? Did they return to places where the best ones grew? Researchers continue to explore these questions, examining how human behavior may have influenced plant development over long periods of time. You walk a little farther and find a flat stone resting near the edge of the patch. You sit down, letting your body relax for a moment. From here you can see the spread of plants more clearly. Clusters forming natural patterns across the land. Not perfectly organized, but not entirely random either. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels calm, the ground feels steady, and in this quiet space you begin to sense something new. A relationship forming between people and plants, between observation and action. Today, food often feels immediate, something we can access without much thought. But here every resource requires attention, time, patience. You imagine someone returning to this place, recognizing it, knowing that at a certain time these plants will be ready, that they can gather them, perhaps bring them back to camp, share them with others. The idea is simple, but it carries weight. You stand again and brush your hands lightly against your clothing. The small traces of seeds fall away, returning to the soil. You take a few steps back and look at the patch once more. It doesn't look different. Nothing has changed in a visible way, and yet something has shifted in your understanding. The land is not just providing, it is responding, subtly, quietly, over time. You turn and begin to walk again, leaving the plants behind, but carrying their presence with you. The wind moves gently across the field. The grasses sway, the distant trees stand quietly, and somewhere beneath your feet, seeds rest in the soil, waiting for the right moment to grow again. You might find comfort in that thought, the idea that life continues in cycles, that small actions can lead to gradual change, that even in a world still adjusting to warmth, new possibilities are already taking root. And as you walk forward, the connection between humans and the land feels just a little clearer, not fully formed, not fully understood, but present, growing slowly just like everything else around you. You move on from the quiet patch of plants, the memory of small seeds, and careful observation still resting gently in your thoughts. The land opens again, and the air feels steady, holding that familiar balance between warmth and coolness. As you walk, you begin to notice something subtle, not just signs of people passing through, but signs of people staying, even if only for a little while longer than before. The ground ahead looks slightly different. Not disturbed in a chaotic way, but shaped in small, deliberate patterns. You slow your steps and look more closely. A shallow hollow in the earth, nearby a curved line of branches set low to the ground, a space that feels defined even without walls. You step closer, your movements quiet. This is not a random place. It has been arranged. A well-supported interpretation is that during this period some human groups began creating more structured temporary shelters using materials like wood animal hides and plant fibers to build spaces that could be used repeatedly. You walk along the edge of the hollow, noticing how the ground inside feels slightly smoother than the surrounding area. It has been used pressed down over time by bodies resting, sitting, sleeping. You lower yourself carefully and sit. The earth beneath you feels firm but not hard. There is a faint warmth trapped in the ground, as if it has held the memory of a fire or the presence of people. You look around from this low position. The shelter is simple, barely rising above the ground, but it offers something important. Protection, not from everything, but from enough. The wind here feels softer. The view is slightly shielded. The space feels contained. Some historians suggest that as environments became more predictable, shelters like this may have been used more frequently, allowing people to return to familiar places and rebuild or maintain simple structures. You reach out and touch one of the branches forming the edge. It bends slightly under your fingers, still flexible. It has been placed with care, angled just enough to create a boundary without requiring heavy materials. A quiet solution to a simple need. A small but meaningful observation is that early shelters were often designed to be efficient rather than permanent, using materials that were readily available and easy to replace or adjust as conditions changed. You lean back slightly, letting your body relax into the space. From here, the sky is partially framed by the low structure. The light filters in softly, creating a calm enclosed feeling. It is not a house. Not in the way you might think of one, but it is something close, a place where you can rest, a place where you can feel even briefly that you belong. You might wonder how it feels to return to a place like this, to recognize it, to know where to sit, where to place your belongings, where the fire once burned. Researchers continue to explore how repeated use of such spaces may have influenced social behavior. Shared shelters could create stronger group connections, offering not just physical protection, but a sense of familiarity. You sit quietly for a moment longer, listening. The outside world continues as it always has. Wind through grass, distant movement of animals, soft shifting of leaves, but here within this small space those sounds feel slightly muted, gentler, more distant. You run your hand lightly across the ground, feeling its texture. It is not perfectly smooth. There are small ridges, tiny imperfections, but it feels shaped, touched, used. Today, comfort often comes from carefully designed spaces filled with objects and structure. But here, comfort is simpler. It comes from shelter, from warmth, from the presence of others. You imagine a small group gathered here, sitting close, sharing food, speaking quietly, the fire casting soft light against the low structure. Not loud, not hurried, just present. Some historians propose that these repeated moments of gathering may have played a role in the development of communication, storytelling, and shared traditions. Time spent together in sheltered spaces allows ideas to be exchanged, remembered, passed on. You take a slow breath and let it out gently. The air inside the shelter feels still, calm. You might notice how your body relaxes without effort. There is something about being enclosed even slightly that brings a sense of ease. You remain seated for a moment longer, then slowly rise. As you stand, the space feels smaller again, but no less meaningful. You step out, returning to the open land. The breeze touches your skin once more, and the sounds of the world become clearer. But something stays with you. The feeling of that space, that quiet enclosure. You turn and look back. From the outside, the shelter is barely visible. It blends into the land, its shape subtle, its presence easy to miss. But you know it is there, a place shaped by human hands, a place that offers rest, a place that in its own simple way begins to feel like home. You begin walking again, your steps slow and steady, and as you move forward you carry a quiet understanding that in this changing world people are not only adapting, they are beginning to create spaces that reflect their needs, spaces that offer comfort, familiarity, connection. And those small spaces, simple as they are, will slowly lead to something much larger in the time to come. You move on from the shelter, the memory of its quiet enclosure lingering gently as the open air welcomes you back. The breeze feels soft against your skin, carrying a faint warmth that now feels steady, almost dependable. As you walk, your attention drifts towards something you've sensed before, but perhaps not fully considered. Fire! not just the one you saw at the camp earlier, but the role it plays in this changing world. You begin to notice the signs: a patch of darkened earth, a faint scent of smoke barely present but still there, small fragments of charred wood scattered lightly across the ground. You slow your steps and approach. This is not an active fire. It has long since cooled. But the marks remain. An established observation is that fire became an increasingly important tool for human groups during this period, used not only for warmth and cooking, but also for managing landscapes, clearing areas, and encouraging the growth of certain plants. You crouch down and touch the blackened soil. It feels dry, slightly brittle, different from the surrounding earth. When you brush it lightly, small particles lift into the air before settling again. You bring your hand closer and notice the faint smell that lingers. Smoke. Even after time has passed, you stand and look around. The plants in this area are different. New growth pushes through the darkened ground, fresh and green against the blackened surface. It is as if the fire, though destructive in the moment, has made space for something new to begin. A subtle but meaningful detail is that fire can return nutrients to the soil, making it more fertile for future plant growth. In some cases, this can lead to more abundant vegetation after the burned area recovers. You walk slowly across the edge of this space, observing how the land responds. The ground feels slightly warmer underfoot, though that may simply be your awareness sharpening. The air carries a different scent here, a mix of ash and fresh growth. It is not unpleasant, just different. You might find yourself wondering how early humans learned to use fire in this way. Not just to survive, but to shape their surroundings. Some researchers suggest that controlled use of fire may have developed gradually through repeated observation of natural fires and their effects. Over time, people may have learned when to burn, where to burn, and how to manage it safely. You continue walking, noticing how the boundary between burned and unburned land is not sharp but gradual. Here the grasses are shorter. There they grow taller. Here the soil is dark. There it returns to its natural colour. It is a quiet transition. You pause and look out across the landscape. The idea that fire can change the land in this way feels significant. Not overwhelming, but powerful in its simplicity. Today, fire is often something we control, carefully aware of its risks and consequences. But here it is part of a relationship between people and the environment, a tool, a force, a companion in a way. Some historians propose that the use of fire may have influenced hunting as well. Burning certain areas could encourage new plant growth, attracting animals to graze, which in turn made them easier to track. You walk a little farther and notice small animal tracks crossing the burned area. Fresh impressions in the soft soil moving toward patches of new growth. Life returning quickly, responding to change without hesitation. You kneel, briefly touching one of the young plants pushing through the dark soil. It feels soft, delicate, yet determined. You stand again, take a slow breath. The air feels steady. The land feels responsive. And you begin to understand something quietly important. Fire is not just a source of warmth. It is a way of interacting with the world, of guiding it even in small ways. You continue walking, leaving the charred ground behind. The landscape returns to its usual balance of green and brown, soft and firm. But your awareness has shifted. You begin to see the land not just as something to move through, but something that can be shaped, gently, carefully, over time. A thoughtful observation is that this growing ability to influence the environment may have marked an important step in human development, setting the stage for more deliberate forms of land use in the future. You walk until the signs of fire fade, completely replaced once again by the quiet continuity of the natural world. The wind moves through the grasses. The distant trees stand still. The sky remains calm and open. And yet beneath all of this there is a subtle shift. A sense that humans are no longer only responding to change, they are beginning to create it. Not in large dramatic ways, but in small meaningful actions that ripple outward over time. You pause one last time and look back toward the area you just crossed. It blends into the land, its marks already softening. But you know what happened there. You understand its significance. And as you turn forward again, continuing your quiet journey, you carry with you a simple realization. that even in a world shaped by climate and time, human choices are beginning to leave their own gentle imprint. You continue walking, the faint traces of fire now far behind you. The land settles once again into its quiet balance, a mix of grasses, scattered trees, and distant water. The air feels calm, almost still, as if the world has paused to let you notice something deeper. Up to this point, you have felt the changes, the warming air, the retreating ice, the shifting plants and animals, but now as you walk more slowly, a different kind of awareness begins to form. A question: what caused all of this? You do not see the answer around you. There is no single sign, no visible force shaping the land in an obvious way. The changes feel real, undeniable, yet the cause remains distant, hidden beyond what your senses can grasp. A widely accepted scientific explanation is that long-term shifts in Earth's orbit and tilt, often referred to as Milankovitch cycles, play a major role in the advance and retreat of ice ages by altering how sunlight is distributed across the planet. You stop for a moment and look up at the sky. It appears unchanged, soft light pale clouds drifting slowly. Nothing about it suggests that it could hold the power to reshape an entire world, and yet in subtle ways it does. You begin walking again, your thoughts moving gently alongside your steps. The idea that something so distant, so gradual, could influence the entire planet feels almost difficult to hold on to. It's not something you can touch, not something you can hear, but its effects are everywhere. Some researchers propose that the sudden end of the Younger Dryas may have involved a complex interaction between ocean currents, atmospheric changes, and melting ice. Rather than a single cause, it may have been a combination of factors aligning in a particular way. You pass through a stretch of land where the grasses grow low, and even the surface smooth beneath your feet. It feels almost untouched, as if the land itself is quietly reflecting the calm that has followed the earlier shifts. You might find yourself wondering how people at the time understood these changes. Did they see patterns? Did they notice that winters became less severe, that summers grew longer? Or did it simply feel like the world was slowly becoming easier to live in? A thoughtful observation is that without written records or instruments, early humans would have relied entirely on memory and shared experience to understand long-term changes. Stories, observations, and subtle awareness would shape their sense of the world. You walk a little farther and notice how the light begins to soften slightly, hinting at the passage of time within the day itself. The warmth remains, but it feels gentler now, more settled. You pause and close your eyes for a moment, letting the breeze move across your face. It carries no urgency, no sharp edge, only a quiet steadiness. A small but intriguing detail is that even slight changes in solar radiation, when extended over thousands of years, can have profound effects on global climate. These changes are almost imperceptible in the short term, yet powerful in the long term. You open your eyes and continue walking. The land stretches out before you, shaped by forces that operate on timescales far beyond a single lifetime. It reminds you that not all change is immediate. Some of it unfolds so slowly that it becomes part of the background of existence, and yet occasionally something shifts more quickly. A tipping point, a moment where gradual change becomes noticeable. Researchers continue to explore how these tipping points occur and why certain periods in Earth's history experience rapid transitions, while others remain stable for long stretches. You step over a small rise and look out across the land once more. It feels peaceful, stable, but now you understand that this stability is not permanent. It is part of a larger cycle. You might find comfort in that idea, or perhaps a quiet sense of curiosity. Today we often think of climate as something we measure, carefully track with data, and discuss in precise terms. But here it is, something lived experience through seasons, through the availability of food, through the feel of the air. You take a slow breath and let it out. The world around you continues its gentle rhythm. Wind moves through the grass. Distant animals shift across the land. Water flows somewhere beyond your sight. And above it all, the sky remains calm, offering no clear sign of the forces that guide it. You begin walking again, your steps steady. The question of cause does not demand an immediate answer. It lingers quietly, a reminder that not everything needs to be fully understood to be felt. Some historians suggest that living through such changes may have encouraged a deeper attentiveness to the environment, a habit of noticing, of remembering, of adapting without needing to explain every detail. You walk until the land begins to level out again, the horizon stretching wide and open. The air feels consistent. The ground feels firm. Everything seems to have settled into a new normal. And as you continue forward, you carry with you a quiet realization that the forces shaping this world are both vast and subtle, distant and immediate, invisible yet undeniable. And in that balance, the story of this changing climate becomes something more than just an event. It becomes part of the quiet structure of life itself. You continue forward carrying that quiet question with you, letting it settle, rather than trying to resolve it. The land ahead begins to dip again, not sharply, but in a wide, gradual slope that draws your attention downward. The air feels slightly cooler as you descend, not cold, just touched by moisture, and soon you begin to hear it. Water again, but this time it is different. Not a river moving with steady purpose, not a stream threading through the land, but something broader, stiller, holding its presence in silence. As you reach the lower ground, the landscape opens to reveal a vast body of water, a lake, wide and calm, its surface stretching far beyond what you can easily see. The light rests gently upon it, reflecting the sky in soft muted tones. You stop at the edge and take it in. This is not a place shaped slowly over long stable periods. This feels more recent, more sudden. A well-supported scientific view is that many large lakes during this time were formed by melting glaciers, where retreating ice left behind depressions that filled with water, or where meltwater became trapped behind natural barriers. You walk along the edge, your steps quiet against the damp ground. The soil here is soft, darker than the surrounding land, holding the memory of water, even where it has receded slightly. You notice faint lines along the shore, marks that suggest the water has not always been at the same level. You crouch and trace one of these lines with your fingers, a previous edge, a moment in time held in the shape of the land. You stand again and look out across the lake. It feels still almost unmoving, but you know that beneath the surface there is quiet motion, subtle shifts, slow currents, the settling of sediment carried from melting ice far away. A small but fascinating detail is that some of these ancient glacial lakes were among the largest freshwater bodies on Earth, at the time far larger than many lakes we see today. You walk a little farther, noticing how the land curves gently around the water. The shoreline is uneven, shaped by the way the lake has filled its space. In some areas, the water reaches farther inland. In others, it pulls back, leaving behind patches of damp soil and new growth. You might find yourself wondering how stable this place really is. Will the water remain here, or will it change again? Researchers continue to examine how these glacial lakes evolved, noting that some remained for long periods, while others drained suddenly when natural barriers gave way, releasing vast amounts of water into surrounding regions. You pause and listen. The lake is quiet, no strong current, no rushing sound, just a faint lapping at the edges, soft and repetitive. It feels calm, but there is a sense that this calm could change. You walk closer to the water and kneel, dipping your hand gently into its surface. It is cool, smoother than the flowing river you touched earlier. The stillness of it feels different, more contained. You lift your hand and watch the droplets fall back, creating small ripples that spread outward before fading into the larger calm. You stand again and look out across the lake. It reflects the sky so clearly that for a moment it feels as though the world has doubled. Above and below, light and reflection. You take a slow breath. The air here feels heavier with moisture, carrying a faint scent of water and earth. You begin to walk along the shoreline once more, your steps leaving soft impressions that slowly fade as the damp ground settles. You notice something else now. Along the edge there are small clusters of plants that seem to prefer this environment. Thicker stems, broader leaves. They gather close to the water, thriving in the damp conditions. Some historians suggest that areas like this may have attracted human groups not only for water, but for the variety of resources they offered. Plants, fish, and animals drawn to the shoreline could all support life in different ways. You stop and watch a bird move across the surface, skimming lightly before lifting again into the air. A brief moment of motion in an otherwise still scene. You might wonder how long this lake has been here. Years, decades, perhaps longer. For someone living nearby, it might feel permanent, a constant feature of the land, and yet you know that it is part of a much larger process, a temporary result of melting ice and shifting terrain. A thoughtful observation is that many landscapes we see as stable are in fact part of ongoing change shaped by forces that operate over long periods of time. You walk until the shoreline begins to narrow the lake, giving way to a more defined edge where water channels begin to form. The stillness transitions into movement. Slowly, gently, you pause one last time and look back across the wide surface. It remains calm, reflective, quiet, and as you stand there, you begin to understand something subtle but meaningful. Not all change is loud or immediate. Some of it gathers, holds, waits, and then when conditions shift, it moves again. You turn and continue your walk, leaving the lake behind. The ground rises slightly, the air becomes lighter, and the sounds of the broader landscape return. But the presence of that still water stays with you. A reminder that even in a world defined by movement and transformation, there are moments where change pauses, where it gathers its strength, and where the surface appears calm even as deeper shifts continue below. You move on from the wide, quiet lake, its still surface lingering in your mind like a reflection that has not quite faded. The ground begins to rise again gently, lifting you away from the damp edge and back onto firmer earth. The air feels lighter here. Dryas, the faint scent of water gives way to the softer smell of grass and soil warming under the steady light. As you walk, you notice how the land seems to carry layers of memory, not just in its shape, but in its silence. You pass through a stretch of open ground where the soil looks uneven, marked by shallow dips and ridges. At first it seems random, but as you look closer you begin to see a pattern. Broad shallow channels, dry now, but once filled with water. You follow one of these paths, your steps tracing its gentle curve. It winds through the land wide enough to suggest that something significant once moved here. A strong line of evidence shows that as glaciers melted, enormous volumes of water were sometimes released, suddenly carving out channels and reshaping entire regions in relatively short periods. You stop and look along the path. It is quiet now, still, but it carries the imprint of something powerful. You might find yourself imagining the moment when water rushed through here. Fast, relentless, filling the space, moving with force, carrying sediment, shaping the land as it went. Now nothing moves. Only wind passes lightly across the surface. A small but striking detail is that some of these ancient flood channels are still visible today, preserved in the landscape as reminders of events that occurred thousands of years ago. You continue walking, following the path until it begins to fade into the surrounding terrain. The edges soften, the ground levels. The memory of water becomes less distinct, and yet it remains. You step onto a slightly elevated patch and turn to look back. From here the channels are easier to see, faint lines stretching across the land connecting to the distant lake you left behind. It becomes clear that the still water and the flowing force are part of the same story. Different moments, different expressions of the same change. Some historians suggest that events like these may have left lasting impressions on the people who witnessed them. Sudden floods, even if rare, would have been powerful experiences difficult to forget. You walk on your thoughts, moving gently. The idea of memory begins to take shape, not just in the land, but in people. You imagine a small group gathered around a fire, speaking quietly. Someone describing water that rose unexpectedly. That moved faster than anything they had seen. That changed the shape of familiar places. The story would not need to be exact. It would not need precise measurements. Only feeling, only impression. A thoughtful observation is that many ancient flood myths from different cultures may have roots in real events passed down through generations, as stories that preserve a sense of what was experienced. You continue walking the land, gradually smoothing out beneath your feet. The air feels calm again, as if the moment of intensity has passed, leaving only quiet behind. You notice a small cluster of stones arranged loosely near a slight rise. Not clearly a structure, but not entirely natural either. You pause and look at them. Perhaps a marker, perhaps a resting place, or perhaps nothing more than coincidence. Still, it draws your attention. You sit down nearby, letting your body rest for a moment. The wind moves gently across the land, carrying a soft, steady sound. You close your eyes, briefly imagining the flow of water that once passed through this place. The sound would have been different, louder, more insistent, filling the space with motion, and now silence. The contrast feels important. Researchers continue to examine how such events influence both the environment and human perception. Sudden changes, even if rare, can shape how people understand risk safety and the stability of their surroundings. You open your eyes and look out again. The land appears calm, untroubled, but you know that it holds deeper stories. Stories of movement, of force, of change that arrives then fades. You stand and brush the dust lightly from your hands. The ground feels firm beneath your feet, steady once more. You begin to walk again, your steps slow and even. As you move forward, the channels disappear behind you, blending into the wider landscape. But the idea remains, that beneath the calm surface of this world there have been moments of sudden transformation, moments that leave marks, moments that are remembered. And as you continue your journey, you carry with you a quiet awareness that not all change is gradual. Some of it arrives quickly, powerfully, then settles into memory, leaving the land and perhaps the people who witnessed it forever shaped in subtle ways. You continue forward, leaving the faint channels behind as the land gradually smooths out beneath your feet. The air feels balanced again, neither heavy with moisture nor touched by cold. It settles around you in a way that feels calm and familiar. As you walk, the ground begins to slope gently downward once more, but this time the descent feels broader, more gradual. The horizon ahead opens, and something in the distance catches the light. Water again, but not like the quiet lake you left behind. Not like the steady river you followed earlier. This feels wider, more open. You walk toward it, your pace slow and steady, until the land levels out and reveals a long stretching shoreline. The water extends far beyond your view, its surface shifting gently under the breeze. This is a coastline, but not one that has always been here. A widely recognized scientific understanding is that as sea levels rose after the last ice age, vast areas of previously dry land were gradually submerged, creating new coastlines and reshaping the edges of continents. You stand at the edge and look out. The water moves softly, small waves forming and dissolving in a steady rhythm. The air carries a faint hint of salt, now sharper than the freshwater scent of rivers and lakes. You breathe it in slowly. It feels different, alive in a new way. You begin walking along the shore, your feet pressing lightly into the damp sand. Each step leaves a mark that lingers briefly before softening, smoothed by the movement of water and wind. The land here feels uncertain. Not unstable, but not fully settled either. You notice how the shoreline curves and shifts, forming small inlets and narrow stretches of land. It feels as though the boundary between earth and water is still being decided. A subtle but fascinating detail is that many ancient coastal areas once inhabited by humans now lie beneath the sea, their traces hidden under layers of water and sediment. You pause and look out again, imagining what once stood where the water now rests. Perhaps open land, paths, gathering places, now gone, not suddenly, but slowly over generations. You continue walking your steps quiet against the soft ground. The sound of the water becomes a constant presence, a gentle rhythm that rises and falls without interruption. You might find yourself wondering how people adapted to this, to the slow loss of land, to the steady advance of water. Some historians suggest that coastal communities may have adjusted, gradually moving inland as needed, following the shifting edge, without fully recognizing the long-term scale of the change. You walk past a stretch where the shoreline narrows the water, coming closer to the land on both sides. The air feels cooler here, touched by the open expanse of the sea. You notice small shells scattered along the ground, their shapes delicate, some broken, some whole. You pick one up and turn it gently in your hand. It feels smooth-shaped by water over time, a quiet object, but full of history. You place it back and continue on. Nearby you see movement. Birds again, but different from those you saw inland. They move along the water's edge, their calls softer, carried away quickly by the breeze. Life here feels connected to the water in a different way, more fluid, more shifting. Researchers continue to examine how rising sea levels influenced human movement and settlement patterns. Coastal regions offered abundant resources, but they also required constant adjustment as the land itself changed. You walk until you reach a slightly higher stretch of ground and stop looking back along the shoreline. It stretches in both directions, fading into the distance. You can see where the water has pushed farther inland, creating new shapes, new edges. It is not chaotic, it is not abrupt, but it is persistent. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air tastes faintly of salt, the sound of the waves remains steady, and the horizon feels endless. Today, coastlines often feel fixed, mapped, defined. But here they are still forming, still shifting in response to forces that move slowly but continuously. You might notice how your sense of space changes here. Inland the land feels contained. Here it opens outward, beyond what you can see. You stand quietly for a moment, letting that openness settle around you. Then you turn and begin to walk again, following the curve of the shore. Behind you, the marks of your steps begin to fade. The water moves forward and back, smoothing the surface, erasing what was just there. And as you continue your journey, you carry a quiet understanding that the edges of the world are not fixed. They move, they shift, they respond to time and change. And for those living here, the boundary between land and sea is not something permanent. It is something to be watched, to be understood, and to be followed as it slowly transforms the world around them. You follow the shoreline for a while, letting the gentle rhythm of the water settle into your thoughts. The steady motion of the waves feels calming, almost predictable, and for a moment it is easy to forget how much the land has already changed. Then slowly you begin to turn inland again. The sound of the water softens behind you, replaced once more by wind moving through grass and the quiet rustle of plants. The air loses its faint salt edge, becoming warmer, softer, more familiar. As you walk, the land begins to feel different. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way small details begin to gather into something meaningful. You notice patches of ground that look more carefully used, not just passed through, not just visited, but returned to. You slow your steps and look more closely. A cluster of plants grows in a loose grouping denser than the surrounding area. Nearby, the soil appears slightly disturbed, as if it has been touched, turned, or worked in some small way. You crouch down and press your fingers lightly into the earth. It feels softer here, looser, as if it has been handled before. A widely accepted perspective is that toward the early Holocene, some human groups began engaging in forms of plant management, encouraging the growth of useful species by clearing areas, scattering seeds, or protecting certain plants. You look at the cluster again. It does not look wild in the same way as the other patches you have seen. There is a subtle order to it, not perfect, but present. You stand and take a few slow steps around the area. There are more signs, small clearings, repeated growth in similar spots, places where plants seem to return again and again. You might find yourself wondering if this is intentional, or simply the result of repeated gathering over time. Some researchers suggest that the line between gathering and early cultivation is not clear-cut. It may have developed gradually with small actions leading to larger patterns without a single moment of change. You kneel again and gently brush aside a bit of soil near the base of one of the plants. The roots hold firmly, the ground supports them well. A quiet partnership between plant and earth. A subtle but important detail is that disturbed soil often allows certain plants to grow more easily, creating conditions that favor species useful to humans. You sit back and look across the land. It feels different from earlier places you have walked. Less random, more shaped, not controlled, but influenced. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air remains calm. The world feels steady, and yet something is beginning to shift. You begin walking again, moving between these patches of growth. The spacing between them feels deliberate even if it is not planned in a formal way. You pass another area where the plants are taller, fuller, perhaps older, perhaps simply more successful. You might wonder how people began to recognize which plants were worth returning to, which ones offered food, which ones were reliable. Some historians propose that this knowledge would have built slowly through observation and memory shared within groups and refined over time. You stop once more and look down at your hands. They carry traces of soil, small particles that cling briefly before falling away. You brush them gently against your clothing. The soil returns to the ground. Nothing is taken for long. Everything cycles back. You stand and look out across the landscape. From here, you can see how these patches connect to the larger environment. Water sources not too far away. Open land for movement. Shelter nearby. It is not random. It is a pattern forming. Researchers continue to explore how these early interactions with plants may have led over long periods to more deliberate forms of cultivation. The process was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, shaped by countless small decisions. You begin to walk again, your pace steady. The wind moves gently across the land. The grasses sway. The patches of plants remain where they are, quiet and persistent. You might notice how your perception has changed. Earlier the land felt something you moved through. Now it feels like something that responds, something that holds memory, that reflects action. You pause one last time and look back at the area. It blends into the wider landscape. Nothing stands out dramatically, and yet something important is happening here. A shift in how humans relate to the world around them. Not just taking what is available, but beginning in small ways to guide what grows, to influence what returns, to shape the future even if only slightly. You turn forward again and continue your walk. The path ahead remains open. The air remains calm, and as you move on you carry a quiet understanding that the seeds of something much larger are already here, not yet visible in full, not yet fully realized, but present, waiting, growing slowly within this changing world. You continue walking, leaving the quiet patches of tended plants behind you. The land feels familiar now in a deeper way, not because it has stopped changing, but because you have begun to understand its rhythms. The air is steady, carrying a gentle warmth that settles comfortably against your skin. As you move forward, the ground rises slightly, offering a wider view of what lies ahead. At first, it seems like any other stretch of land. Grass is moving softly, scattered trees, distant movement of animals. But then you begin to notice something different. Not just one place shaped by human presence, but several. You slow your pace. In the distance, there are faint traces of smoke rising in more than one spot. Thin, pale lines that drift upward before dissolving into the sky. You walk a little closer. The signs become clearer. More than one camp. Not close enough to feel crowded, but close enough to suggest something new. Connection. A commonly supported interpretation is that as environments stabilized and resources became more reliable, human groups could gather in slightly larger numbers, or remain within closer proximity to one another than before. You pause and observe. The camps are not identical. Each one has its own arrangement, its own subtle shape, but they share similarities. Central fires, simple shelters, areas of activity. You begin to walk between them, keeping a respectful distance. The ground here feels more worn, not heavily, but enough to suggest repeated movement. Paths form naturally, where people pass again and again, even if they are not marked in any formal way. You might find yourself wondering how these groups interact. Do they meet often? Do they share knowledge? Or do they keep their distance, aware of one another, but separate? Some historians propose that this period may have seen increasing interaction between groups, whether through shared resources, seasonal gatherings, or simple proximity. You continue walking, noticing how the space between the camps feels alive in its own way. Footprints overlap, animal tracks cross human paths. The land carries multiple layers of movement. A subtle but meaningful detail is that the exchange of ideas and tools between groups may have accelerated during times when populations were more stable and less dispersed. You stop near a slightly elevated patch and sit down, allowing yourself to observe. From here you can see two camps at once, smoke rising gently from both. The distance between them feels intentional. Not too close, not too far, enough space for each group, but close enough to remain aware. You take a slow breath. The air carries faint traces of smoke blending with the scent of grass and earth. You listen. Distant sounds reach you. Soft voices, perhaps, or simply the movement of people. It is difficult to tell, but it is there. You might notice how different this feels from earlier moments in your journey, before human presence felt isolated, small, scattered. Now it feels more connected, more aware of itself. Researchers continue to explore how these early forms of proximity may have influenced social development. Being near other groups creates opportunities for learning, cooperation, and even conflict. You stand again and walk slowly toward the space between the camps. The ground here feels especially worn, suggesting that this area is used more frequently. A shared space, perhaps? You notice a cluster of stones arranged in a loose circle different from the shelters you saw earlier. This feels more open, less private. A place for gathering. You step closer and pause. The stones are warm from the day's light. You rest your hand on one of them, feeling its solid presence. You imagine people sitting here, talking, sharing stories, exchanging tools or food, learning from one another. Some historians suggest that such interactions may have played a role in the spread of innovations, allowing new ideas to move between groups more easily. You sit down for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. The sounds of the camps remain distant but present. The air feels calm, the land feels steady, and in this space between groups there is a sense of possibility. You might find yourself wondering how relationships form in a world like this, without written language, without formal agreements, only through presence, through repeated encounters, through shared understanding. You stand again and take a slow look around. The camps remain where they are, each holding its own space, but the distance between them feels important. It is not emptiness, it is connection. You begin walking again, moving beyond the shared space and back into the open land. The signs of human presence gradually fade. The ground becomes less worn. The air carries fewer traces of smoke. But something has changed. You carry with you a quiet awareness that people are no longer just surviving within this changing world. They are beginning to relate to one another in new ways, to gather, to share, to exist not just as isolated groups, but as part of a wider human landscape. And as you continue forward, the idea settles gently into your thoughts that this growing sense of connection will shape everything that comes next, slowly, quietly, but steadily. You move beyond the quiet cluster of camps, the faint trails of smoke dissolving into the open sky behind you. The land ahead feels wide again, but not empty. There is a subtle sense that movement continues here, even when you cannot immediately see it. The air is calm, carrying only the soft whisper of wind through grass. As you walk, your attention begins to settle on small details once more. Footprints, not just one direction, many crossing paths, some deeper, some lighter. You slow your pace and follow one of these faint trails. It leads across the open land, then curves slightly toward a patch of trees before fading into the ground. Another path intersects it, then another. You stand still for a moment, looking at how these lines overlap. It feels like a quiet network. Not planned, but real. A widely accepted view among archaeologists is that even before formal trade systems existed, human groups exchanged materials such as stone shells and tools across distances, often through repeated contact or indirect movement between groups. You take a few steps along one of the paths, imagining how it might have been used. Someone walking with purpose, carrying something, returning from somewhere else. You notice a small object resting near the edge of the path. You crouch down and pick it up. It is a piece of stone, but not like the others you have seen. Its color is slightly different, its texture smoother. It feels out of place, as if it did not originate here. You turn it slowly in your hand. Someone brought this from somewhere else. A subtle but intriguing detail is that certain types of stone used for tools have been found far from their original sources, suggesting that materials travelled across regions, sometimes over many generations. You place the stone back where you found it and stand again. The idea settles gently into your thoughts. Movement is not just about survival. It is also about connection. You continue walking, following the faint traces of overlapping paths. They lead you through a slightly more open stretch of land where the grasses grow shorter and the ground feels firmer. You notice more signs now. Small objects left behind, a broken piece of bone, a fragment of a tool, each one carrying a quiet story. You might find yourself wondering how these exchanges happened. Were they direct? Did people meet face to face? Or did objects pass from one group to another over time, moving slowly across the landscape? Some researchers suggest that both forms likely existed, with direct interaction in some cases and gradual movement of materials in others. You pause and look around. The land feels connected in a way that is not immediately visible. Paths intersect. Objects appear in unexpected places. Signs of movement overlap. It is not organized, but it is not random either. You take a slow breath. The air feels steady. The ground feels familiar, and yet the idea of distance begins to shift. You begin to understand that this world, though vast, is not isolated. Groups may be separated by land, by rivers, by time, but they are not entirely disconnected. You walk a little farther and come across a small clearing where the ground is more worn than usual. You step into it and look down. The soil is compact, pressed by repeated use. You notice faint marks where something may have been placed. Objects set down, picked up, moved again. A thoughtful observation is that places like this may have served as informal meeting points, where people paused, exchanged items, or simply passed through on their way elsewhere. You sit down for a moment, letting your body rest. The clearing feels quiet but not empty. There is a sense that it has been used many times, even if no one is here now. You imagine two groups meeting here, not in large numbers, just a few people, sharing, trading, communicating in ways that do not require words. You might notice how simple the exchange could be. A tool for another, a resource for something different, a quiet understanding passing between them. Some historians propose that these early exchanges may have helped spread knowledge, not just materials. Techniques, ideas, and skills could move along the same paths carried by people who travelled between regions. You stand again and take a slow look around. The clearing remains still. The paths continue outward in different directions. You begin walking once more, choosing one of the faint trails and following it gently. The land stretches ahead, open and calm. The wind moves softly. The sky remains steady. And beneath it all, movement continues. Not always visible, not always direct, but present. You might find comfort in that idea, that even in a world without formal systems, connection exists. That people find ways to share, to exchange, to reach beyond their immediate surroundings. You walk until the path begins to fade again, blending into the wider landscape. The signs of passage become lighter, less frequent, but the understanding remains. You carry it with you as you continue forward. A quiet awareness that this changing world is not just shaping individuals or small groups. It is beginning to link them together. Through movement, through exchange, through the simple act of crossing paths. And in that gentle connection, something larger begins to form. Not yet visible, not yet defined, but growing slowly, just like everything else in this unfolding story. You follow the fading trail until it dissolves completely into the wider land. The ground becomes smooth again, unmarked, as if gently resetting itself after the quiet movement of those who passed before you. The air feels calm, steady. There is something about this moment that feels settled in a deeper way than before, not just in the land, but in how it behaves. You walk across an open stretch where the grasses sway in slow, even waves. The wind does not change direction suddenly. It moves with a soft consistency, brushing past you in a way that feels familiar. You pause and notice it. This sense of predictability. It is subtle, but it is there. A well-supported idea in climate science is that during the early Holocene, many regions experienced a relatively stable climate compared to the dramatic fluctuations of the Ice Age, allowing ecosystems and human societies to develop more consistent patterns. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels reliable, not shifting sharply, not surprising you, just present. You begin walking again, and as you do, you notice how your body responds differently. Your steps feel more relaxed, your movements less cautious. You're no longer constantly adjusting to sudden changes in ground or temperature. You are moving within something that holds its shape. You might find yourself wondering how this would feel over time, to live in a world where conditions do not change as drastically, where you can expect certain things to return. Some researchers suggest that this growing stability may have allowed human groups to plan more effectively, making decisions based on patterns they could observe and remember. You walk toward a small rise and climb it slowly. From the top you can see a wide stretch of land that reflects everything you have experienced so far. Water flowing in the distance, trees scattered across the terrain, animals grazing quietly, patches of plants growing in familiar places. It all fits together. Not perfectly, but consistently. You sit down and rest your hands on your knees. The ground feels firm, supportive. You notice how little you need to adjust your position. There is no sharp cold pushing through the soil, no unstable surface shifting beneath you, just a quiet steadiness. A small but meaningful detail is that stable climates tend to support more diverse ecosystems, allowing a wider range of plants and animals to coexist and thrive over time. You look out across the land again. It feels alive, but not unpredictable. You might notice how this changes your perception of time. Earlier, each moment carried uncertainty. Now there is a sense that tomorrow will resemble today. Not exactly, but closely enough. You stand again and begin to walk your steps slow and even. The wind continues its gentle movement. The light remains soft. The sounds of the world blend together into a calm, steady background. Some historians propose that this kind of environmental reliability may have shaped human expectations, allowing people to develop routines and habits that depend on the world behaving in familiar ways. You pass through a patch of grass where the ground feels slightly warmer, touched more directly by the sun. A few steps later, you enter a shaded area where the temperature drops gently. These changes are small, predictable, comfortable. You might find yourself thinking about how much easier it is to move through a world like this, to plan, to prepare, to trust. Researchers continue to explore how this stability may have encouraged long-term thinking, allowing people to consider not just immediate needs, but future possibilities. You walk until you reach another open area and stop. The horizon stretches wide. Nothing interrupts it. No sudden shifts, no dramatic contrasts. Just a steady, continuous landscape. You take a deep breath and let it out slowly. The air feels calm. The world feels steady. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something quietly important. This stability is not just a background condition. It is a foundation. It allows everything else to develop, to grow, to connect. You might notice how your own thoughts feel calmer here, less reactive, more reflective. You turn slowly, taking in the full view one more time. Then you begin walking again. The land remains consistent beneath your feet. The air remains gentle around you. And the sense of predictability continues to shape your experience. You carry it with you as you move forward, a quiet awareness that this steadiness, this calm repetition of patterns, is creating the conditions for something new, something that depends on trust in the world, trust that it will continue, that it will hold. And as you continue your journey, that trust begins to feel like one of the most important changes of all. You walk on from the wide, steady view, carrying that quiet sense of reliability with you. The land continues in its calm rhythm, but as you move farther, you begin to notice something different again. Not a return to chaos, but a shift. A reminder that even a stable world carries its own challenges. The ground beneath your feet begins to change. At first it feels slightly firmer, then gradually drier. The grasses here are thinner spaced farther apart. The colour fades from deep green to a softer, duller tone. You slow your pace and look more closely. The soil is lighter, cracked in small places, not deeply, not dramatically, but enough to notice. A commonly recognised environmental pattern is that even within stable climate periods, local conditions can vary, leading to regions that experience dryness or limited rainfall at certain times. You crouch down and press your fingers into the ground. It resists slightly. Less moisture, less softness. You lift your hand and brush away the dust that clings briefly to your skin. You stand again and look around. The land here feels quieter, not empty, but restrained. You might find yourself wondering how people responded to places like this, where resources are less abundant, where water is not always close. Some researchers suggest that even in a generally stable climate, human groups needed to remain flexible, adjusting their movements and strategies based on local conditions. You walk a little farther, your steps slower now. The air feels warmer here, not in a comforting way, but in a way that settles more heavily. The breeze is weaker, offering less relief. You notice fewer animal tracks, fewer signs of movement. Life is still present, but less concentrated. A small but important detail is that dry conditions can limit the availability of certain plants and animals, shaping where people choose to spend their time. You continue walking, your awareness sharpening again. Earlier stability brought ease. Now it requires attention. You might find yourself thinking about how balance works. Too much change brings uncertainty, but even stability can hold variation. Some historians propose that these variations may have encouraged people to develop broader knowledge of the land, understanding where to go when certain areas became less supportive. You walk until you reach a shallow dip in the ground where a few plants grow more densely. You step into it and immediately notice the difference. The soil feels cooler, softer. There is a faint trace of moisture here, a small refuge within a drier space. You kneel and touch the ground. It yields slightly beneath your fingers. Life gathers where it can. You sit back for a moment, letting your body rest. The air here feels just a little easier to breathe. You might notice how quickly your perception shifts, from discomfort to relief, from scarcity to presence. Researchers continue to explore how early humans may have mapped these variations in their minds, remembering where water could be found, where plants would grow even in drier times. You stand again and look out across the surrounding land. The contrast is clear. Dry stretches, small pockets of growth, a landscape that requires movement, awareness, adaptation. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels warm but manageable. The world is not hostile, just varied. You begin walking again, your steps measured. You pass through another dry patch, then another small area of thicker growth. A pattern emerges, not uniform, but understandable. You might find comfort in that. The idea that even challenges follow patterns, that difficulty is not random. Some historians suggest that living in such environments may have strengthened resilience, encouraging people to remain attentive and adaptable, even as the broader climate became more predictable. You walk until the land begins to soften again, the grass is growing thicker once more. The air cools slightly. The breeze returns. The tension fades. You pause and look back at the drier stretch you just crossed. It blends into the landscape, not standing out dramatically, but you know it is there. A reminder that stability does not mean uniformity, that even in a calmer world there are still places that test you. You turn forward again and continue your journey. The ground beneath your feet feels steady once more. The air feels balanced, and as you walk you carry a quiet understanding that adapting to change is not something that ends when the climate stabilizes. It continues, in smaller ways, in quieter ways, through attention to detail, through awareness of place, and in that ongoing process, life continues to adjust, finding its way through both comfort and challenge. You leave the drier stretch behind, the memory of cracked soil and scattered growth slowly softening as the land becomes more balanced again. The air feels gentler here, and your steps fall into an easy rhythm, steady and unhurried. As you walk, the landscape begins to feel familiar in a deeper way, not just because of what you see, but because of what you sense. The patterns, the cycles, the quiet predictability, and then, almost without noticing, your thoughts begin to drift towards something else. Memory, not the memory of the land itself, but the memory carried by those who live within it. You move across a wide open area where the grasses sway softly in the breeze. The ground feels firm beneath your feet, and the air carries a calm warmth that now feels entirely natural. You imagine a small group gathered here, perhaps at the edge of day. A fire burning low, voices quiet, someone speaking. Not urgently, not loudly, but steadily. A well-supported perspective is that oral traditions likely played an important role in early human societies, allowing knowledge, experiences, and observations to be passed from one generation to the next. You slow your pace, letting the idea settle. Stories, not written, not recorded in objects, but carried in voices, shared, remembered. You might find yourself wondering what they spoke about. Perhaps the places where water could be found, the paths animals followed, the best times to gather certain plants, but also something else, the past. Some researchers suggest that memories of colder times may have been preserved in subtle ways even as the climate warmed. Descriptions of harsher winters, of wider ice, of landscapes that no longer exist. You walk a little farther and pause, looking out across the land. It is difficult to imagine this place covered in ice. Difficult to feel the deep cold that once defined it. And yet it was not so long ago. A small but fascinating detail is that human memory passed through generations can preserve impressions of environmental change even without precise timelines or measurements. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels warm, comfortable, and that contrast becomes clearer. You imagine someone older sitting near the fire describing a world that feels almost impossible now. A world where the cold pressed constantly, where the land was harder, where movement was more difficult. You might wonder how those stories were received, with curiosity, with disbelief, or simply as part of the natural flow of life. Some historians propose that such stories may have shaped how people understood their environment, reminding them that the world can change even if it feels stable in the present. You begin walking again, your steps slow and thoughtful. The land stretches out before you, calm and steady, but now you carry with you a sense of depth. That beneath this present moment lies a different past, one that is not visible, but still present in memory. You pass through a small cluster of trees and notice how the light shifts gently as it filters through the leaves. The ground beneath feels cool, protected. You pause for a moment and sit down. The stillness here feels deeper. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the voices of those who came before, not as clear words, but as a quiet presence. A continuation of experience. Researchers continue to explore how oral traditions may have helped early humans adapt, allowing knowledge to accumulate over time even in the absence of written language. You open your eyes and look around. The trees stand quietly, the wind moves softly, the world continues its steady rhythm. You might notice how memory and environment begin to feel connected. The land holds traces of the past in its shape. People hold traces of the past in their stories. Together they create a layered understanding of the world. You stand again and brush your hands lightly against your clothing. The ground beneath you remains unchanged, but your awareness has shifted. You begin walking once more, moving out from the shade and back into the open. The light feels warm, the air feels steady, and the landscape stretches forward in quiet continuity. You carry with you a simple realization that even as the world changes, memory allows something to remain. Not exactly as it was, but enough to be felt, enough to be remembered. And as you continue your journey, that sense of continuity settles gently within you, a quiet thread connecting past and present, guiding understanding, shaping perception, and reminding you that the story of this changing world is not only written in the land, it is also carried within the people who live upon it. You walk on carrying the quiet sense of memory with you. The land feels steady beneath your feet and the air holds that familiar warmth that now seems to belong here. As you move forward, the landscape begins to shift once more. Not in the plants, not in the animals, but in the shape of the land itself. The ground slopes gently downward, and as you follow it, you begin to notice something unusual. The surface feels smooth in a way that does not quite match the surrounding terrain. You slow your steps and look more closely. The soil here is different, more compact, more even, as if something once pressed against it for a very long time. You walk farther and the shape becomes clearer. A wide, shallow basin stretches across the land. It feels open, but also contained. You stand at the edge and look across it, sensing that this place holds a story that is no longer visible in an obvious way. A widely accepted geological interpretation is that many landscapes shaped by glaciers retain subtle features even after the ice has disappeared, such as flattened surfaces, ridges, and basins formed by long periods of pressure and movement. You step down into the basin. The ground feels firm, almost polished in places as if it has been worn smooth over time. You might find yourself wondering what this place looked like before the warmth, before the water, before the plants returned. Some researchers suggest that areas like this were once covered by thick ice, the weight of which slowly reshaped the land beneath it. You pause and place your hand on the ground. It feels still, silent, but you can almost imagine the immense pressure that once existed here. A small but intriguing detail is that glaciers can carry rocks and debris across long distances, leaving them behind as the ice melts, creating features that seem out of place in the current landscape. You stand again and look around. The basin feels empty, but not in a lifeless way, more like a space that has already completed one part of its story. You walk across it slowly, your steps echoing softly in the open area. The air feels slightly cooler here, settling gently into the lower ground. You notice a few scattered stones larger than the surrounding rocks resting alone on the surface. You walk toward one and examine it. Its shape is worn smoothed by forces that feel distant and immense. It does not seem to belong to this exact place, and yet here it is. You might wonder how it came to rest here, how far it travelled, what carried it. Some historians and scientists propose that these isolated rocks, often called erratics, were transported by moving ice and left behind as it melted, marking the paths glaciers once followed. You continue walking across the basin, your awareness deepening. The land here feels older, not in age, but in presence. It carries the imprint of a world that no longer exists, a world of ice, of weight, of slow, powerful movement. You reach the centre and stop. From here, the edges of the basin rise gently around you, creating a quiet enclosure. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels still, almost held. You might notice how different this feels from the open spaces you have walked through before. This place feels contained, protected, but also marked by something that has already passed. Researchers continue to study how these glacial features influence modern landscapes, affecting drainage, soil composition, and the way ecosystems develop. You turn slowly, taking in the full shape of the basin. It is not dramatic, not overwhelming, but it is meaningful, a quiet reminder of the forces that once shaped this world. You begin to walk toward the far edge, your steps steady. As you climb out, the land gradually returns to its familiar patterns. Grasses, trees, open space. The basin fades behind you, blending into the landscape once more. But you carry its presence with you. You carry the understanding that beneath the surface of this stable, warming world lies a deeper history, one that is not always visible, but always present. You might find comfort in that thought, the idea that the past does not disappear. It becomes part of the foundation, part of what supports everything that comes after. You continue walking your pace calm. The air feels steady. The land feels alive. And as you move forward, you carry a quiet awareness that even as the world changes, traces of what came before remain, not as something to return to, but as something that shapes the path ahead. You walk on from the shallow basin, the land gradually returning to its familiar balance of grass, scattered trees, and open sky. The air feels steady, and your steps fall easily into the quiet rhythm that has guided you this far. As you move forward, something begins to shift again. Not in a sudden way, but in a way that gathers slowly, almost without drawing attention. You begin to notice spaces where the land feels more used, not just a single camp, not just a temporary shelter, but areas where presence lingers longer. You slow your pace and look around. The signs are subtle. Flattened ground that extends beyond a single resting spot. Clusters of shelters that feel more organized. Paths that connect one space to another in a more consistent pattern. You step closer, your attention sharpening gently. This place feels different, more settled. A broadly supported idea in archaeology is that as the climate stabilized and resources became more predictable, some human groups began to spend longer periods in specific locations, gradually laying the groundwork for more permanent forms of settlement. You walk along one of the faint paths, noticing how it leads from one structure to another. The spacing feels intentional, even if it is not planned in a formal way. There is a sense of arrangement, of quiet structure. You pause and look at the shelters. They are still simple, low to the ground, made from natural materials, but they appear more consistent in shape and placement, as if built with memory, with repetition. You might find yourself wondering how it feels to stay in one place longer, to return not just seasonally, but repeatedly, to begin recognizing the land not just as a place to move through, but as a place to remain. Some researchers suggest that this gradual shift toward longer stays may have been influenced by the reliability of food sources, water, and the growing understanding of local environments. You walk slowly through the area, careful not to disturb anything. The ground feels firm beneath your feet, worn in places by repeated use. You notice a central open space where the soil is smoother, more compact. A gathering area. You step into it and pause. The air feels still, held. You imagine people here, not just passing through, but living, resting, returning to the same place again and again. A small but meaningful detail is that repeated occupation of a site can gradually change the soil, making it more compact and distinct from the surrounding land. You sit down for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. The space feels different from the scattered camps you saw earlier, more connected, more cohesive. You might notice how the idea of time changes here. Earlier, everything felt temporary. Now there is a sense of continuity, of days building upon days, of presence extending beyond a single moment. Some historians propose that this gradual increase in settlement duration may have been one of the earlier steps toward the development of villages and eventually cities. You stand again and walk along the edge of the area. The shelters remain simple, but their placement suggests familiarity, knowledge passed down, experience shaping decisions. You pass a small area where tools are gathered together, not scattered randomly, but kept within reach. Another sign of organization, of intention. Researchers continue to explore how these early forms of settlement influence social structures, allowing for more consistent interaction, cooperation, and shared responsibilities. You pause and look out beyond the settlement. The wider landscape remains as it was, open, calm, changing slowly. But within this space, something new is forming. A different way of living. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels steady. The ground feels certain. And you begin to understand something quietly important. This is the edge of something larger. Not yet a village. Not yet a city. But the beginning of staying. Of building. Of returning to the same place, not just out of necessity, but out of choice. You might find comfort in that idea. The shift from constant movement to occasional stillness. From passing through to remaining. You turn and begin to walk again, leaving the clustered shelters behind. The paths fade gradually as you move away. The signs of settlement soften into the wider land, but the understanding remains. You carry it with you as you continue forward. A quiet awareness that the world is no longer just shaping people. People are beginning to shape how they live within it. And in that gentle shift, the foundations of something far greater are being laid. Not all at once, not in a single moment, but slowly, steadily. Just like everything else in this changing world, you continue walking, leaving the clustered shelters behind. The land opens once more, returning to that wide, steady expanse you've come to know. The air feels calm, and your steps fall into a quiet rhythm, almost matching the slow movement of the world itself. As you move forward, your attention begins to shift again, not to any single detail, but to everything at once. The ground beneath you, the air around you, the movement of water plants and animals, all of it connected. You pause and stand still. For a moment you do not move at all. You simply observe. The wind moves through the grasses in gentle waves. A bird crosses the sky, its path smooth and unhurried. In the distance, animals shift across the land, following patterns you can now almost anticipate. Everything feels part of something larger. A commonly accepted idea in environmental science is that climate acts as a major force shaping ecosystems, influencing where plants grow, where animals move, and how landscapes develop over time. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels balanced, neither demanding nor uncertain. Just present. You begin walking again, your thoughts moving softly alongside your steps. The idea settles gently within you. that the climate is not just something that happens, it is something that shapes everything else. You pass through a patch of land where the soil feels slightly richer, supporting thicker plant growth. A few steps later, the ground becomes lighter, drier, with fewer signs of life. The variation is subtle, but consistent. You might find yourself wondering how much of what you have seen is guided by these unseen patterns. Why certain plants grow in one place and not another. Why animals follow certain paths. Why people choose particular areas to rest, gather, or stay. Some researchers suggest that these decisions, both human and animal, are closely tied to environmental conditions, even if they are not consciously understood in a scientific way. You walk toward a small rise and climb it slowly. From the top, the view spreads out in every direction, and for the first time you begin to see it all as a whole. The water sources, the patches of forest, the open grasslands, the areas shaped by fire, the places where people gather. They are not separate. They are connected. A subtle but meaningful detail is that ecosystems often depend on the balance between different elements, where changes in one part can influence many others. You sit down at the top of the rise, letting your body rest. The ground feels firm beneath you. The air moves gently across your skin, and the view remains wide and calm. You might notice how your understanding has changed. Earlier, each place felt like its own story. Now it feels like part of a larger system, a pattern that repeats and connects across the land. Some historians propose that as humans spent more time observing their environment, they may have developed a deeper awareness of these connections, even if they did not describe them in formal terms. You take another slow breath. The world feels steady, but not simple. There is complexity here. Layers, interactions that unfold quietly over time. You might think about how this applies to everything you have seen. The melting ice shaping rivers and lakes, the water supporting plants, the plants feeding animals, the animals guiding human movement, the people shaping the land in return. It all connects. Researchers continue to explore how these interconnected systems develop, noting that even small changes can ripple outward, influencing entire environments. You stand again and take one last look across the landscape. It feels complete in a way that is difficult to describe. Not finished, but whole. You begin walking, again your steps slow and steady. The wind continues its gentle movement. The light remains soft, and the land stretches forward calm and continuous. You carry with you a quiet realization that climate is not just a background condition. It is a silent architect, shaping everything without being seen directly, guiding the growth of life, influencing movement, creating patterns that repeat across time. And as you continue your journey, that understanding settles gently within you, a sense that this world, though vast and ever-changing, is held together by forces that connect every part of it. Slowly, quietly, but completely. You continue walking the wide view, slowly narrowing again as the land rises gently beneath your feet. The sense of connection you felt moments ago remains with you, but now it settles into something quieter, more familiar. The world around you begins to feel recognizable, not just as a place you've traveled through, but as a place you understand. The air is soft and balanced. The ground is steady. The patterns of life feel consistent, almost expected. You walk across a stretch of land where everything seems to come together. Grasses sway in even waves. Trees stand in scattered clusters. Water glints faintly in the distance. Animals move in quiet, predictable ways. Nothing feels out of place. A broadly accepted view among scientists is that by the early Holocene, many regions of the Earth had begun to resemble the environments we recognize today, with stable ecosystems supporting diverse plant and animal life. You pause and take a slow breath. There is a sense of calm here, not just in the moment, but in the structure of the world itself. You might find yourself noticing how little effort it takes to move through this space now. Earlier, every step required attention, care, adjustment. Now your body moves naturally, comfortably, as if it belongs here. You walk a little farther and notice how the light rests gently across the land, creating soft contrasts without harsh edges. The air carries a steady warmth, not too strong, not too weak. You might think about how this compares to the world you know today. and realize that in many ways it is the same. The seasons, the landscapes, the balance of life, all of it has roots here. Some researchers suggest that this period of stability provided the foundation for everything that followed, including the development of agriculture settlements and eventually complex societies. You continue walking, your thoughts moving gently. The idea settles within you that this is not just another moment in time, it is a beginning. Not a sudden one, but a gradual one. You pass through a small grove of trees and notice how the shade feels familiar, the temperature shifting gently as you move between light and shadow. You reach out and touch the bark of one of the trees. It feels solid, established. A small but meaningful detail is that many plant species that dominate modern landscapes began expanding during this time, taking advantage of the stable climate conditions. You continue on, leaving the grove behind. The land opens again, offering a clear view of the horizon. It stretches wide, calm and steady. You might find yourself wondering how long this stability will last, whether the world will remain like this, or change again in ways not yet visible. Some historians propose that while this period brought stability, it also set the stage for new challenges as growing populations and changing lifestyles introduced new pressures on the environment. You walk slowly, your steps matching the calm pace of the land. The wind moves softly. The sounds of life remain steady. Everything feels balanced. You pause once more and look out across the landscape. It feels complete, not perfect, but whole. You take a deep breath and let it out slowly. The air feels calm. The world feels steady. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something simple. This is the world becoming what it is, not all at once. Not through a single event, but through countless small changes layered over time. You turn and begin to walk again, your steps slow and even. The land continues beneath you. The air continues around you, and the patterns of life continue in their quiet rhythm. You carry with you a sense of familiarity now, a recognition that what you are seeing is not distant or strange. It is the foundation of everything that follows. And as you move forward, that understanding settles gently within you. A quiet awareness that the world you know has its roots here, in this calm, in this balance, in this steady unfolding of change into stability. You continue walking, the sense of familiarity settling deeper with each step. The land feels calm, steady, and complete in a quiet way that no longer asks for your full attention. You move through it easily now, guided by patterns that feel natural rather than uncertain. The air is soft. The light is gentle. Everything seems to have found its place. You slow your pace, not because the ground demands it, but because there is nothing urging you forward. The journey no longer feels like movement through change. It feels like movement within something that has settled. You reach a quiet rise and stop. From here, the land stretches out in every direction, carrying all the elements you have come to recognize. Water glinting in the distance, trees standing in quiet clusters, grasses moving in soft waves, animals tracing familiar paths. Nothing feels new, and yet everything is. A broadly supported understanding is that the beginning of the Holocene marked a turning point in Earth's history, creating the environmental conditions that would eventually support agriculture, permanent settlements, and the rise of complex human societies. You take a slow breath and let it out. The air feels steady, reliable. You might find yourself reflecting on everything you have seen. The cold that once defined this world, the sudden shifts, the melting ice, the rising waters, the return of plants and animals, the gradual changes in how people lived, all of it leading here, to this quiet balance. Some researchers suggest that this moment, this transition into stability, may have been one of the most important shifts in human history, even if it passed without clear recognition at the time. You walk a few steps forward and sit down. The ground feels firm beneath you, comfortable. You rest your hands lightly on your knees and look out across the landscape. It does not demand your attention. It does not surprise you. It simply exists. A small but meaningful detail is that many of the environmental systems we rely on today, from seasonal cycles to stable ecosystems, began forming during this time and have continued ever since. You might notice how your thoughts slow. There is no need to anticipate sudden change, no need to adjust constantly, just a quiet awareness of the present. You sit for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle fully. The wind moves gently across the land. The light softens slightly as time passes. The sounds remain calm and consistent. Some historians propose that it is within this kind of stability that humans began to imagine new possibilities. Not just survival, but planning. Not just movement, but staying. Not just reacting, but shaping. You stand slowly, your movements unhurried. There is nowhere specific you need to go. The journey has already brought you here. You take one last look across the land. Everything feels connected. Everything feels steady. And you begin to understand something quietly profound. That this moment, this calm after long change, is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of many others. You turn and begin to walk again, your steps soft against the ground. The air remains gentle, the land remains steady, and the world continues in its quiet rhythm. Now, as the light fades just slightly, you allow yourself to settle even more deeply into the calm. The breeze softens, the sounds grow quieter. The movement of the land slows in your awareness. You might imagine the sky darkening gently, the first hints of evening settling in. The warmth of the day easing into a cooler night. You walk a little farther, then stop once more. There is no need to go on. You simply stand, then slowly sit, letting the ground support you. The world feels safe, steady, at rest. Your breathing slows. The air feels softer, and the landscape, once full of change, now feels like a place where everything has found its balance. You let your thoughts drift. No urgency, no pressure. Just the quiet presence of a world that has settled into itself. The wind becomes a soft whisper. The distant sounds fade. The light continues to dim gently, gradually. And as you sit there, you allow yourself to rest fully within this calm. The journey has carried you through change, through uncertainty, through transformation. And now it brings you here, to stillness, to quiet, to a world that holds you gently as the day comes to an end. You breathe slowly, the air cool against your skin, the ground steady beneath you, and the world around you fading softly into night. Sweet dreams.